The moment I realized what was happening, time seemed to slow down. There I stood at the altar, white dress catching the light streaming through stained glass windows, with the man I loved beside me, and words I'd never written projected onto the screen behind the minister. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My mother-in-law's satisfied smirk from the front pew confirmed my worst fears. She hadn't just suggested small edits to our vows as Noah had innocently mentioned last week. She had completely rewritten them. Rewritten them to include promises I would never make, to respect family traditions above all else, to defer to the wisdom of those who came before, and, most shockingly, to prioritize giving the Carter family the grandchildren they deserve. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me as Marcus, our officiant, looked at me expectantly. Noah squeezed my hand, unaware of the betrayal written in elegant calligraphy on the cards he held. In that moment, I had a choice to make. Read the vows Diane had crafted to essentially erase my identity, or speak my truth and risk ruining the wedding we'd spent a year planning. What happened next changed everything. Not just our wedding day, but our entire future as a family. 6 months before I found myself at that altar facing an impossible choice, I was the happiest woman in Portland. Noah had proposed during a surprise hike to Multnomah Falls, the place where we'd had our first date 3 years earlier. The ring, a vintage emerald that had belonged to my grandmother, sparkled on my finger as we began planning our life together. "Elena, you're practically glowing," Riley said, refilling my coffee cup at our favorite corner cafe, Raindrop Coffee. My best friend since college had screamed so loudly when I called with the news that I swear the neighbors filed a noise complaint. "I still can't believe it's real," I admitted, twisting the ring that still felt foreign on my finger. "Noah wants a short engagement. We're thinking early October at St. Andrews." Riley nearly spat out her latte. 6 months? That's ambitious. For a wedding. Have you met with Diane yet to discuss it? I tried not to let my smile falter. Noah's mother, Diane Carter, was complicated. A former event planner turned full-time socialite. She had very specific ideas about how things should be done. And by things, I mean everything. Especially when it came to her only son. "We're having dinner at their house tomorrow." "Night?" I said. "Noah says she's excited to help with the planning." Riley raised an eyebrow. "And how do you feel about that?" I sighed, watching steam rise from my cup. "I'm trying to be optimistic. She's going to be family, right? Maybe planning the wedding together will help us bond." "Just remember it's your wedding, Ellie. Not hers." I nodded, but a knot of anxiety had already formed in my stomach. Diane had never fully approved of me. I wasn't from the right family, didn't attend the right schools, and, perhaps most unforgivably, I was taking her son away from the family business. The Carters owned a chain of high-end furniture stores across the Pacific Northwest, and while Noah's older sister had happily stepped into a management role, Noah had forged his own path as an environmental engineer. The next evening, Noah and I pulled up to the imposing colonial house where he'd grown up. The meticulously maintained garden seemed to stand at attention as we walked up the stone pathway. Noah squeezed my hand reassuringly before ringing the doorbell. "Noah, darling." Diane swung the door open, wrapping her son in an embrace that seemed to deliberately exclude me. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she turned to me with a practiced smile. "Elena, how lovely." William Carter, Noah's father, greeted us, more warmly. A tall man with Noah's kind eyes and easy smile, he pulled me into a hug. "Welcome to the family officially," he said, leading us into the formal dining room where a table had been set with the family's finest china. Dinner began pleasantly enough, with William asking about my latest children's book illustrations, and Noah discussing a restoration project. At work. But it wasn't long before Diane shifted the conversation. "So, about the wedding," she said, delicately patting her lips with a napkin. "I've taken the liberty of putting together some preliminary ideas." From beside her chair, she produced a thick binder labeled Noah and Elena's Wedding in ornate script. My stomach dropped as she flipped it open to reveal not just ideas but fully formed plans, venue options, none of which included St. Andrews, color schemes, all in muted beiges and creams, nothing like the rich autumn colors we'd discussed, and a guest list that included at least 100 names I didn't recognize. "Mom," Noah started, his voice edged with warning. "Elena and I already have some ideas." "Of course you do, honey," Diane interrupted. "But I've been planning events professionally for 20 years, and the Carters have certain traditions to uphold." Her eyes flickered to me. Elena might not be familiar with these expectations. The subtle criticism wasn't lost on me. I straightened in my chair. "Actually, Diane, we've already reserved St. Andrew's Chapel for October 12th, and we're thinking of Riverstone Gardens for the reception." Diane's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "St. Andrew's is so common these days. The Peyton Wilson wedding was just held there last month. And as for Riverstone, an outdoor reception in October, it will be freezing and probably raining." "We're having a tent with heaters," Noah explained, "and we love the idea of being surrounded by the fall colors." "Well," Diane said, closing, her binder with a snap that felt like punctuation to her disapproval, "I can see you two have given this some thought. Though I do hope you'll consider some of our family's wishes. After all, the Carters have certain connections and obligations in this community." William cleared his throat. "What Diane means is that we want to support whatever makes you both happy." The look Diane shot her husband could have frozen the Pacific. I felt Noah's hand find mine under the table as an uncomfortable silence descended. "You know," I said, trying to extend an olive branch, "we would really value your help with the invitations, Diane. Noah mentioned you have a wonderful eye for stationery." But it was a small concession, but Diane visibly softened. "I do know the best calligrapher in the Northwest, and Crane & Co.'s paper stock is exceptional." As she launched into detailed descriptions of weight, texture, and embossing options, Noah gave my hand a grateful squeeze. I smiled back, thinking this might work after all. Diane just needed to feel included, to have her expertise acknowledged. Maybe Riley's concerns were overblown. The wedding planning progressed over the following weeks, punctuated by small skirmishes and negotiated compromises. I stood firm on my autumn color palette of deep burgundy, forest green, and burnt orange, while conceding to Diane's insistence on letterpress invitations with gold foil details. Noah and I chose a band that specialized in our favorite indie songs, but agreed to have them learn The Way You Look Tonight for the mother-son dance. Through it all, I reminded myself that these were small battles in the grand scheme of our life together. I'd grown up with a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. The idea of elaborate wedding traditions seemed foreign to me, but they clearly meant something to the family I was joining. 4 months before the wedding, Riley and I were in my small craftsman bungalow, addressing invitations when she brought up a subject I'd been avoiding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Have you and Noah written your vows yet?" she asked, carefully copying an address onto an envelope. I groaned. "Not yet. Noah wants to do personalized vows, but I'm terrified of speaking in front of everyone." "You'll be great," Riley assured me. "Just speak from your heart." That's what Noah said too. I smiled, thinking of how he'd held me close in our kitchen and promised that no matter what I said, they'd be the perfect words because they'd be mine. The next day, over Sunday brunch at the Carters' house, I made the mistake of mentioning our plan to write our own vows. Diane set down her mimosa with such force that orange juice sloshed over the rim. Personal vows? That's not how we do things in our family. Carters have used the traditional Episcopal vows for generations. Noah frowned. Mom, Elena and I want our ceremony to reflect who we are as a couple. And who you are doesn't include respecting family traditions. Diane's voice was sharp enough to cut the tension filling the room. William intervened, as he often did. Perhaps there's a compromise. Could you incorporate elements of both? I seized the lifeline. That's a great idea. We could include traditional elements while adding our personal promises. Diane didn't look convinced, but she nodded curtly. I suppose that could work, though I hope you'll let me review them before the ceremony. Sometimes what seems appropriate in private can be embarrassing when shared publicly. The criticism stung, but I reminded myself to focus on the bigger picture. Of course, I lied, knowing I had no intention of submitting my heartfelt words for Diane's approval. As the wedding approached, Diane's interventions grew more frequent and more pointed. She, coincidentally, showed up to my final dress fitting, suggesting alterations that would make my bohemian-style gown more classical. She questioned the flower arrangements, the seating chart, even my choice of shoes. No one wears color on their wedding day, Elena. 2 weeks before the wedding, Noah and I met with Marcus Reed, the minister who would officiate our ceremony. A kind man with salt and pepper hair and infectious enthusiasm, Marcus had worked with us to craft a ceremony that honored tradition while allowing for personal touches. Have you finished your vows? He asked, his eyes twinkling with encouragement. Noah proudly produced a folded paper from his wallet. Finished mine last night? I blushed. I'm still working on mine. Writing doesn't come as naturally to me as it does to Noah. Take your time, Marcus assured me. The most meaningful vows are those that truly reflect your commitment. On the way home, Noah's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and sighed. It's Mom. Again. I could hear Diane's voice through the speaker as Noah answered. Darling, I've been thinking about the ceremony, and I had the most wonderful idea. Why don't I help Elena with her vows? I know she's been struggling. My head whipped toward Noah so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. How did she know that? That's thoughtful, Mom, but Elena wants to write them herself, Noah replied carefully. I understand, but time is running out. Maybe I could just suggest a framework or review what she has so far. We want everything to be perfect, don't we? The way she said perfect made it clear that my idea of perfect and hers were very different things. I'll talk to Elena and get back to you, Noah said eventually, ending the call with a promise to come by for dinner later that week. The silence in the car was heavy as we pulled into our driveway. You don't have to show her your vows, Noah said finally. I know how personal they are. I stared at our little house, with its crooked porch swing and the wildflower garden I'd planted in defiance of the manicured lawns of my future in-laws. It's not just about the vows, Noah. It's about everything. Your mother has been trying to control every aspect of our wedding, of our life together. Noah ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of his inner conflict. She means well. She has trouble letting go. Does she mean well? Or does she want to shape our wedding, our marriage, into what she thinks it should be, regardless of what we want? He didn't have an answer for that. Later that night, I finally sat down to write my vows, pouring my heart onto the page in fits and starts until the words felt right. These weren't just promises for a ceremony. They were the foundation of our future together. I sealed them in an envelope and tucked them into my desk drawer, away from Diane's prying eyes. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of final details and family arriving from out of town. My mother flew in from Arizona, bringing with her sunshine and uncomplicated support that felt like a balm after months of navigating Diane's expectations. Riley and my cousin Grace, who had offered to handle the ceremony programs as her wedding gift to us, kept me laughing through the rehearsal dinner, despite Diane's thinly veiled criticisms. Such a unique approach to the seating chart, Elena. Most brides would have separated the divorced couples, but I suppose this works too. The night before our wedding, Noah called from his parents' house, where tradition dictated he stay. "Just one more sleep until you're Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice warm with anticipation. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that," I replied. "I'm thinking of keeping my name. Or maybe we could hyphenate. Mitchell Carter has a nice ring to it." The silence on the other end was brief but noticeable. "Mom mentioned you might be considering that." I sat up straighter. "Your mother and I haven't discussed my name at all." "Oh." Noah sounded confused. "She said something about you being modern about traditions. I just assumed." A chill ran through me. "Noah, when exactly did your mom bring this up?" Last week, when she was helping me finalize some paperwork for the honeymoon. She mentioned seeing something you wrote with both our last names. I hadn't written anything with a hyphenated name yet. I'd only discussed the possibility with Riley over texts I'd sent from my phone, which had mysteriously disappeared for several hours last weekend when we were all at the Carters for a pre-wedding family barbecue. "Noah," I said slowly, "I think your mother might have looked through my phone." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's crazy, Ellie. Why would she do that?" But we both knew why. Information was control, and Diane Carter needed to be in control. I changed the subject, not wanting our last conversation before becoming husband and wife to be about his mother's boundary issues. But as I tried to sleep that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that there was more happening behind the scenes than I realized. The morning of our wedding dawned with the kind of golden October light that photographers dream about. Riley arrived at the Hawthorne Hotel suite with champagne and pastries, followed by my mother and the other bridesmaids. As my hair was styled into loose waves with small burgundy flowers woven throughout, I tried to push aside my worries and focus on the joy of the day. "You look absolutely radiant," my mother said, tears shining in her eyes as I slipped into my dress. The ivory silk fell in soft folds around me, the delicate lace overlay catching the light. "Let me get a picture for Noah," Riley said, raising her phone. "No," I blurted more sharply than I intended. "I mean, I want him to see it for the first time when I walk down the aisle." Riley raised an eyebrow but put her phone away. I couldn't explain my sudden paranoia, how I feared any image sent might somehow find its way to Diane, who might find some flaw to point out or change to suggest even now, hours before the ceremony. At St. Andrew's, the historic stone church was transformed with arrangements of deep red dahlias, burnt orange roses, and greenery that echoed the autumn leaves outside. Through the partially open chapel doors, I could see guests arriving, including Diane in a cream-colored suit that was almost white, a choice that hadn't escaped my notice. Grace hurried over to me in the small antechamber where we were waiting. "Elena, did you approve the final program design? I just saw them and they look different from what we discussed." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, different?" Grace handed me one of the ceremony programs, elegantly designed with a golden leaf motif on thick cream paper. At first glance, it looked beautiful. But as I scanned the order of service, my blood ran cold. Under Exchange of Vows, it specifically mentioned traditional Episcopal vows rather than the personal exchange of promises we had planned. "There must be some mistake," I said, flipping through the program. "Did the printer mix up our order with someone else's?" Grace shook her head. "I asked the usher. He said Mrs. Carter delivered these herself this morning. Said there had been a last-minute change." Riley, who had been listening, cursed under her breath. "That woman doesn't quit, does she?" I closed my eyes, trying to center myself. Doesn't matter. Marcus knows we're doing personal vows. The program is just a piece of paper. But a small voice inside wondered what else Diane might have changed without telling us. I didn't have to wait long to find out. As our guests were seated and the string quartet played the processional music, Zoe, our wedding planner, approached with an apologetic expression. "Elena, I'm so sorry, but Reverend Marcus just told me there's been a change to the ceremony structure. Apparently, Mrs. Carter spoke with him earlier and provided the finalized vows for both you and Noah. He assumed this was approved by both of you." My vision tunneled. She did what? Zoe handed me a card with elegant calligraphy, unmistakably Diane's preferred style. I scanned the words, my horror growing with each line. These weren't just traditional vows. They were vows specifically, crafted to define our marriage in Diane's terms. My promise to honor the Carter name and its legacy. To embrace the guidance of family in all decisions. And most disturbingly, to welcome new life according to family expectations. I looked up at Zoe, then at Riley and my mother, who were watching with growing concern. "Did Noah see these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Zoe shook her head. "I don't think so. Mrs. Carter said she was helping finalize everything for both of you as a surprise." The string quartet transitioned to a new piece, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. In moments, the bridesmaids would start their procession down the aisle. After them, I would walk toward Noah, toward a ceremony that had been hijacked without my knowledge. "I need a minute," I managed to say, ducking into a small side room used for storage. My mind raced with impossible choices. I could go through with the ceremony, reading vows that betrayed everything I believed about our partnership. I could cause a scene, confronting Diane in front of 200 guests. Or I could run, leave the church and Noah standing at the altar. None of these options felt right. This was supposed to be our day, mine and Noah's, not a performance orchestrated by his mother. A soft knock at the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. "Elena?" It was my mother. "Honey, it's time." I opened the door, clutching the false vows in my shaking hand. "Mom, I don't know what to do." She took one look at my face and the card I held, and her expression hardened with determination. My mother, who had raised me alone after my father, left, who had worked impossible hours to give me opportunities, who had taught me to stand up for myself. She knew exactly what to do. "You're going to walk down that aisle," she said firmly, "and you're going to marry the man you love. But you're going to do it your way." She reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Your real vows. I found them. In your desk when I was looking for something borrowed for you to wear. I thought you might want them, just in case." Tears blurred my vision as I took the paper, my actual vows written in my own handwriting. "But what about Diane? About these?" I waved the calligraphed card. My mother's smile was fierce. "Some battles you fight head-on, Elena. And some you win by simply refusing to play by someone else's rules." The music changed again. My cue was approaching. With my mother's help, I tucked my real vows into a discreet pocket that had been sewn into my dress, Riley's insistence for my something unexpected. Then, with a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway where my mother's brother, who had agreed to walk me down the aisle in my father's absence, waited with an encouraging smile. As the doors to the chapel opened fully and the congregation rose to their feet, I saw Noah at the altar. His face lit up at the sight of me, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the programs, not the rewritten vows, not Diane's satisfied smile from the front pew. Just Noah, standing tall in his dark suit, waiting for me to begin our life together. With each step down the aisle, my determination grew. By the time I reached the altar and took Noah's hands in mine, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The tea ceremony began traditionally enough, with Marcus welcoming everyone and speaking about the sanctity of marriage. Noah and I exchanged smiles, his filled with adoration, mine with a resolve he couldn't yet understand. Then came the moment of truth. Marcus announced it was time for the exchange of vows, and gestured to the projection screen where, in elegant script, the words Diane had crafted appeared for all to see. I saw Noah's brow furrow in confusion as he glanced at the screen, then back at me. "Elena," Marcus prompted gently, "if you would begin." I took a deep breath and looked directly at Noah, ignoring the screen, the audience, and especially Diane, in the front row. "Noah," I began, my voice stronger than I expected, "these aren't the vows I wrote for you, and I don't think they're the vows you expect to hear." A murmur went through the congregation. From the corner of my eye, I saw Diane stiffen. "Someone took it upon themselves to rewrite our promises without our knowledge or consent," I continued. "To insert their vision of our future into our most sacred moment." I pulled the folded paper from my hidden pocket. "These are my real vows, the promises I wrote from my heart, and these are the only ones I will make today." A gasp came from the front pew, but I kept my eyes fixed on Noah, whose expression had shifted from confusion to understanding, and then to something that looked remarkably like pride. "Noah Carter," I said, unfolding my paper with steady hands, "I vow to build a life with you based on mutual respect and equal partnership. I promise to support your dreams as fiercely as my own, to challenge you when you need challenging, and to stand beside you when you need strength." I could hear movement in the congregation but didn't break my focus. "I promise to create with you a home that is a sanctuary for both of us, where both our voices are heard, where both our needs matter. I vow to face life's joys and sorrows as your true partner, not as an extension of you or your family, but as myself, bringing all that I am to our shared journey." My voice grew firmer. "I do not promise to obey without question. I do not promise to defer my judgment to others. I promise instead to honor the family we build together by protecting its independence and integrity." I paused, folding the paper, back up. "And I promise to always speak truth to you, even when it's difficult. Starting now." Only then did I allow myself to glance toward the front pew, where Diane had risen to her feet, her face a mask of fury and embarrassment. Before she could speak, Noah squeezed my hands, drawing my attention back to him. "Elena," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "those are the most beautiful vows I've ever heard, and they're exactly what I want from our marriage." He turned toward his mother. "Mom, did you rewrite our vows without telling us?" The church was absolutely silent as Diane stood frozen, caught between denial and defense. Finally, she sputtered, "I was only trying to help, to make sure the ceremony properly reflected our family values." Noah's face hardened. "Our marriage will reflect our values, mine and Elena's, no one else's. How dare you speak to me this way in public?" Diane's voice rose shrilly. "After everything I've done for this wedding? William, say something." William Carter stood slowly, his face grave, but instead of defending his wife, he extended his hand to her. "Diane, I think it's best if we step outside. I will not be humiliated like this." She looked around wildly, seeking allies but finding none. "This girl has turned you against your own mother." Noah's voice was quiet but firm. "No, Mom. Your actions have done that all on their own." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, with a strangled sound of outrage, Diane grabbed her purse and stormed down the aisle toward the exit, her heels clicking against the stone floor like exclamation points. William followed more slowly, pausing only to mouth, "I'm sorry," toward Noah and me before he disappeared through the heavy wooden doors. For a moment, no one moved. Then Marcus cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should continue?" he suggested gently. Noah turned to face me fully, his eyes shining with a mixture of apology and admiration. "My turn," he said, pulling out his own handwritten Vows. "And these are definitely mine. I didn't show them to anyone." The congregation chuckled, breaking the tension, and our ceremony continued. Noah's vows matched mine in sincerity and partnership, and when we were finally pronounced husband and wife, the applause that filled the historic chapel felt like more than just celebration. It felt like vindication. As we walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand as equals, I caught sight of my mother and Riley in the front row, both wiping away tears and beaming with pride. Behind them, dozens of faces showed support, respect, and even a little awe. Outside the church, there was no sign of Diane, though William waited awkwardly by the steps. "I'm so sorry," he said, embracing his son. "I had no idea she had gone this far." Noah nodded stiffly. "We can talk about it later, Dad. Today is about celebrating." And celebrate we did. Our reception at Riverstone Gardens was everything we had dreamed, filled with laughter, dancing, and autumn beauty. Even the weather cooperated, providing a spectacularly clear evening under stars that seemed to bless our union with their eternal light. Diane never appeared at the reception, though William returned after a couple of hours, looking tired but relieved. "She's gone home," he told us quietly during a brief, private moment. "She needs time to process what happened, what she did." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and regret. I hadn't wanted to publicly embarrass my new mother-in-law, but I couldn't allow her to dictate the terms of our marriage from its very beginning. Late in the evening, as Noah and I swayed slowly on the dance floor, he leaned down to whisper, in my ear, "I've never been prouder of anyone than I was of you today, standing up for us like that." I looked up at him, at the man who had stood beside me, rather than giving in to family pressure. "Partnership, remember? That's what I promised." He smiled, pressing his forehead against mine. "And I promise that from now on, my mother's influence stops at our doorstep." "Do you think she'll ever forgive me?" I asked softly. Noah considered this. "Maybe not for standing up to her, but hopefully, someday, for loving me enough to fight for the marriage we want, not the one she tried to create for us." As the night ended and we prepared to leave for our honeymoon, Riley pulled me aside for one last hug. "What you did today," she whispered fiercely, "that wasn't just for you and Noah. It was for every person who's ever had someone try to control their life choices." "You're my hero, Ellie." I laughed, but felt the truth of her words. By refusing to speak vows that weren't mine, I'd done more than just save my wedding day. I'd set the tone for my entire marriage. I'd shown Diane, Noah, and perhaps most importantly, myself, that our relationship would be built on honesty and equality, not manipulation and control. Later that night, as Noah and I finally collapsed into bed in our honeymoon suite, exhausted but happy, he pulled me close. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "maybe we should thank my mother." I looked at him incredulously. "Thank her? For trying to hijack our wedding?" He grinned, for giving us the perfect opportunity to prove, right from the start, that our marriage is strong enough to withstand outside pressure, that we choose each other, on our own terms. And as I drifted off to sleep in my husband's arms, I realized he was right. Diane's attempt to control our vows had inadvertently given us the chance to demonstrate exactly what kind of partnership we intended to build, one where we faced challenges together, spoke our truths clearly, and refused to let anyone else define our relationship. It wasn't the wedding day I had imagined. It was better, because it was authentically ours. I woke up the morning after our wedding to sunshine streaming through the gauzy curtains of our hotel suite. For a blissful moment, I simply enjoyed the warmth of Noah beside me and the pleasant weight of my new wedding band. Then the memories of yesterday came flooding back, not just the joy of marrying the man I loved, But the confrontation at the altar, Diane's furious exit, and the mixture of tension and relief that had colored parts of our reception. "Morning, Mrs. Mitchell-Carter," Noah murmured, his eyes still closed but a smile playing on his lips. I propped myself up on one elbow to look at him. "You remember that conversation, huh?" He opened his eyes, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "I remember everything about yesterday, especially how brave you were." "I wasn't trying to be brave," I admitted. "I was just trying to be honest. Same thing sometimes." He sat up, checking his phone on the nightstand. His expression fell, slightly. 15 missed calls from Mom," I sighed. "Should you call her back?" Noah set the phone down with deliberate care. "Not today. Today is just for us. The honeymoon officially starts now." He was right, of course. We had a flight to catch that afternoon. 2 glorious weeks in New Zealand, far from wedding drama and family expectations. But as we packed, ate breakfast, and prepared to leave for the airport, I couldn't help but worry about what awaited us when we returned. Noah caught me staring into space as I folded a sweater. "Hey," he said gently. "Where'd you go?" "I'm wondering what happens next," I confessed. "With your mom, I mean." He sat beside me on the bed, taking my hands in his. "What happens next is that my mother learns to respect our boundaries, or she doesn't get to be part of our lives in any meaningful way. I'm done letting her manipulate us." The conviction in his voice was reassuring, but relationships were rarely that simple, especially family ones. "She's still your mother, Noah, and she clearly has a strong influence on your dad. Dad will come around. He's been enabling her behavior for decades. But I think yesterday was a wake-up call for him, too." Noah squeezed my hands. "But that's a problem for 2 weeks from now. Right now, our only job is to enjoy being newlyweds in one of the most beautiful places on Earth." He was right again. I resolved to put Diane and her schemes out of my mind as we boarded our flight to Auckland that evening, and for the most part, I succeeded. New Zealand was everything we'd hoped for. Breathtaking landscapes, adventures like bungee jumping and kayaking, quiet moments in remote cabins with no cell service. We hiked through forests that seemed enchanted, took a boat through glowworm caves, and watched the sunset from volcanic beaches with black sand that sparkled like crushed obsidian. Most importantly, we had time to simply be together, away from the pressures and expectations that had dominated the last 6 months. We talked about everything: our hopes for the craftsman bungalow we'd bought together, my plans for a new children's book series, Noah's ambitions to lead more restoration projects. We even broached subjects we'd carefully avoided during wedding planning, like when, or if, we wanted to start a family, and how we would balance career ambitions with parenthood if we did. "I always assumed I'd have kids someday," Noah admitted. One night as we lay in bed, listening to rain patter against the roof of our cabin. "But I'm not in any rush. I want us to have time just for us first." "Me too," I said, relieved. "My mom raised me alone, and it was so hard for her. I want children eventually, but I want to be intentional about it, not just because it's what's expected." He pulled me closer. "Nothing in our life together is going to happen just because it's expected. Not by my mother, not by society. We decide." The days passed too quickly, and before I knew it, we were boarding our return flight to Portland. I felt both rejuvenated and apprehensive as the plane touched down in familiar territory. Noah must have sensed my mood shift because he took my hand as we waited for our luggage. "Whatever happens with my family, we're a team," he reminded me. "Nothing's changed about that." Riley was waiting at arrivals, holding a handmade sign that read, "The Mitchell-Carters," in bold letters decorated with little cartoon honeybees. As soon as we cleared the security barrier, she enveloped me in a fierce hug. "Welcome back, warrior bride," she exclaimed, then hugged Noah too. "How was New Zealand?" "Actually, don't answer that yet," Let's get your bags to the car first. As we followed her to short-term parking, I braced myself for news about Diane. Riley was never one to hold back information, and her determinedly cheerful chatter about local weather and a new coffee shop opening near our house told me she was avoiding something. Once we were settled in her car, I couldn't take it anymore. Okay, Riley. Out with it. What's happened with Diane while we were gone? Riley exchanged a glance with Noah in the rearview mirror. Are you sure you want to get into this right now? You literally just landed. We'd rather know, Noah said firmly. Riley sighed, pulling out of the parking space. Well, your mother-in-law has been busy. After she left the wedding, she apparently went home and spent the next 3 days telling anyone who would listen that Elena had humiliated her and turned her son against her. She's been calling your friends, distant relatives, even your boss, Noah. My stomach dropped. What has she been saying? Different stories to different people. With some, she's playing the victim, the poor mother-in-law unfairly excluded from wedding planning. With others, especially those who don't know you well, Elena, she's suggesting that you orchestrated the whole Vows situation as some kind of power play. Noah's jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. Who would believe that? Most people don't, Riley assured us. The guests at the wedding saw what happened, and your dad has actually been surprisingly helpful. That caught both our attention. My dad? Noah asked. Riley nodded. He's been quietly setting the record straight with people, not confronting Diane directly, from what I've heard, but making sure people know the truth when she spreads her version of events. I thought about William Carter, with his kind eyes so like Noah's, who had always seemed content to remain in his wife's shadow. That's unexpected. There's more, Riley said, turning onto the highway. Your cousin Grace got a call from Diane asking for all the wedding photos. She claimed she was creating a special album for you two as a surprise gift. Noah snorted. Right, so she could, edit herself back into the reception photos she missed? Or worse, make sure no one else ever saw them, I suggested. Grace? Didn't give them to her, did she? Nope. She told Diane that the photos belonged to you and Noah, and she needed your permission first. Diane apparently hung up on her. Riley grinned. Grace did send me some previews, though. They're gorgeous. You two look amazing, and the fall colors were perfect. I leaned back against the headrest, processing everything. Part of me had hoped that Diane might use our absence to reflect on her actions, maybe even recognize how inappropriate her behavior had been. But instead, she had doubled down, trying to rewrite history, just as she had tried to rewrite our vows. There's one more thing, Riley said hesitantly. Your landlord called me yesterday, Elena. Apparently, someone tried to access your house while you were away. They claimed to be your mother-in-law and said they needed to water your plants. Noah sat up straighter. My mother tried to get into our house? The landlord refused without written permission from you. He said the woman was pretty insistent, but he held firm. The thought of Diane trying to enter our home, our private space, sent a chill through me. What had she been hoping to find or do in there? Riley pulled into our driveway, and the sight of our little bungalow, with its slightly overgrown garden and the wind chimes Noah had hung from the porch ceiling, filled me with both relief and unease. This was our sanctuary, the place we'd made together. The idea of Diane invading it felt deeply wrong. We should change the locks, Noah said quietly as we unloaded our luggage, just to be safe. I nodded, too disturbed by the thought of Diane potentially having a key to argue. After thanking Riley and promising to call her the next day, we carried our bags inside. The house was exactly as we'd left it, but somehow it felt different, as if the knowledge of Diane's attempted intrusion had left an invisible mark. Noah did a quick walkthrough of the rooms while I checked our mail. Among the pile of envelopes and flyers was a thick cream-colored card with a wax seal, unmistakably from the Carters. I opened it with trepidation. Inside was a formal invitation. Mr. and Mrs. William Carter request the pleasure of your company for a post-wedding celebration honoring their son and new daughter-in-law Noah and Elena Carter. The date was set for the following Saturday, just 5 days away. At the bottom, in elegant handwriting that I recognized as William's, not Diane's, was a personal note. We would very much like to honor your marriage in the proper way. Please come. William. Noah returned from checking the house and saw the invitation in my hands. What's that? I handed it to him wordlessly. He read it, his expression darkening. Unbelievable. After everything that's happened, she still doesn't get it. I'm not even going to respond to this. The note at the bottom is from your dad, I pointed out. Maybe he's genuinely trying to make amends? Noah ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration. Or maybe Mom is using him as a way to get to us. She knows I'm more likely to respond to him than to her right now. He had a point. William had always been the buffer between Diane's demanding nature and the rest of the world. But I also remembered his face at the wedding, the quiet apology, the way he'd followed Diane out of the church with slumped shoulders that spoke of decades of similar exits. What if we go, but on our terms, I suggested. We can set clear boundaries beforehand. Noah looked skeptical. What kind of boundaries would make you feel comfortable walking into that house again? I thought about it. A public commitment from your mother acknowledging what she did and apologizing. No rewriting history. And a promise to respect our choices going forward. She'll never agree to that, Noah said, but he was already reaching for his phone. I'll call Dad and tell him those are our conditions. The conversation with William was brief but revealing. He seemed genuinely remorseful about what had happened at the wedding and insisted that the reception was his idea, not Diane's. When Noah laid out our conditions, there was a long pause. Your mother is struggling with all of this, William said finally, his voice crackling through the speakerphone. She's never had her authority challenged so publicly before. This isn't about authority, Dad, Noah replied firmly. It's about respect. Mom tried to fundamentally alter our wedding ceremony without our consent. That crosses a line that goes way beyond normal mother-in-law meddling. Another pause. I understand, and for what it's worth, I agree with you. What she did was wrong. William's voice strengthened. I'll talk to her, but please give us a chance to make this right. The reception is important, not just for appearances, but because I want to properly celebrate your marriage. Your mother does too, in her own way. After we hung up, Noah and I looked at each other, both exhausted despite it being only late. Afternoon. Jet lag and family drama were a potent combination. I don't trust this, Noah admitted. Mom has a way of turning situations to her advantage. I know, I agreed. But your dad seemed sincere. And maybe there's value in facing this head-on, instead of letting it fester. The next few days were a readjustment to normal life. Noah returned to work, while I set up my illustration table and began drafting concepts for my next book project. We talked to Riley, Grace, and other friends about the wedding, sharing stories from our honeymoon and carefully avoiding the topic of Diane's recent activities. Thursday evening, the phone rang. It was William. Elena, he said, sounding tired but determined. I wondered if you might be willing to meet me for coffee tomorrow, just the two of us. My surprise must have been evident in my voice. Without Noah? I think it might be easier to speak frankly. And there are some things I'd like to share with you, about Diane, about our family, things that might help you understand what's happening now. I agreed to meet him at a cafe downtown the next morning. When I told Noah about the invitation, he looked concerned. You don't have to do this alone, he said. I can come with you. I shook my head. I think your dad is right. We might speak more freely one-on-one. And honestly, I'm curious about what he has to say. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, but William was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. I remembered you take it with just a splash of cream, he said, pushing 1 cup toward me as I sat down. From brunch at our house that time. I was touched by the small gesture of attentiveness. It was so different from Diane's approach of trying to mold others to her preferences rather than noting theirs. Thank you for meeting me, William began after I'd taken a sip. I wanted to apologize properly for what happened at the wedding. Not just for Diane's actions, but for my inaction. I should have seen what was happening and stepped in sooner. You did step in, I reminded him. You took her out of the church when things got heated. He shook his head. Too little. Too late. I've been doing that for 40 years, managing the aftermath of Diane's episodes, instead of preventing them. The candor in his voice surprised me. Episodes? William sighed deeply. That's what I came to talk to you about. Diane isn't just controlling or difficult. There's more to it than that. He hesitated, twisting his wedding band. After Noah was born, Diane suffered from severe postpartum depression. It went undiagnosed for years because back then, people didn't talk about such things. By the time she got help, certain patterns of thinking had become entrenched. What kind of patterns? I asked gently. Fear of losing control. Catastrophic thinking. When things don't go exactly as she's planned them, she doesn't just get disappointed like most people. She experiences it as a threat to her very identity. He looked at me directly. It doesn't excuse what she did with your vows. Nothing could excuse that. But I thought you should know that her behavior comes from a place of illness, not just selfishness. I absorbed this information slowly. It cast Diane's actions in a different light. Not less wrong, but perhaps more complex than pure malice. Does Noah know about this? I asked. William shook his head. Not fully. We've never discussed it openly. In our generation, mental health wasn't something you talked about, especially with your children. But why tell me now? Because you're family now, he said simply. And because if there's any hope of having a healthy relationship with Diane, going forward, you need to understand what you're dealing with. She's been in therapy for years, but major life changes, like her only son getting married, can trigger her worst tendencies. I thought about all the controlling behaviors during our engagement, the escalating interference, culminating in the vow incident. It made a certain kind of sense now. The wedding was a perfect storm for her, William continued. Noah choosing a life so different from what she had envisioned, the ceremony not following family traditions, and then your very reasonable boundaries during planning. All of it felt like rejection to her. When she rewrote those vows, in her mind, she was fixing something broken, not violating your trust. That doesn't make it okay, I said firmly. No, it doesn't, he agreed immediately. And she needs to face the consequences of her actions. That's actually why I'm here. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. This is from Diane. I asked her to write down her thoughts rather than attempt another conversation that might go off the rails. I took the envelope hesitantly. You've read it? Yes, and I've asked her therapist to help her understand why what she did was so harmful. This letter is the result of several difficult sessions. He pushed back his chair. I'll give you privacy to read it. Take as long as you need. As William went to order another coffee, I opened the envelope with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The paper inside was expensive stationery, but the handwriting was less controlled than I'd seen in Diane's previous notes. The letters more hurried, less perfectly formed. Dear Elena, William and Dr. Martins tell me I need to write this letter, without excuses or justifications. That is difficult for me, but I am trying. What I did with your wedding vows was wrong. I had no right to change the words you and Noah had chosen to begin your marriage. When I saw the vows you had written, which William found in the minister's office, I felt threatened by their independence. I convinced myself I was protecting Noah and our family traditions, but really, I was protecting myself from the fear of losing control and losing my son to a woman I didn't choose for him. Dr. Martins has helped me see that my actions have actually created the very situation I feared most. By trying to control your wedding, I have damaged my relationship with Noah and with you. I cannot promise to change overnight. The thought patterns I've developed over decades will take time to address, but I can promise to try. To recognize when my need for control is driving my behavior. To respect the boundaries you and Noah set, even when they make me uncomfortable. The reception we have planned is not a trap or a way to save face socially. It is a genuine attempt to honor your marriage properly and to begin making amends if possible. If you choose not to attend, I will understand. If you do come, I commit to acknowledging publicly what I did and apologizing both to you and to the guests who witnessed my behavior at the church. I hope that with time we might find a way forward as a family, not on my terms, but on terms we create together. Diane. I read the letter twice, searching for the manipulative undertones I'd come to expect from Diane's communications. But this felt different, less polished, more vulnerable. The acknowledgement of her wrongdoing was clearer than I had expected, and the promise to publicly apologize seemed significant. When William returned to the table, I carefully refolded the letter. Has she really agreed to acknowledge what she did at the reception? In front of everyone? William nodded. It was her idea, actually. After several therapy sessions, she recognized that her attempts to rewrite history were just another form of control. And you believe she's sincere? This isn't just another strategy to get what she wants? He considered the question carefully. I believe she is trying. Whether she can follow through remains to be seen. Diane's patterns run deep, and she's fighting against her own nature in many ways. He leaned forward. But I also believe that, if anyone can help her change, it's you and Noah. Your strength at the wedding, standing up for yourselves while remaining compassionate, that affected her profoundly, even though she couldn't admit it at the time. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I appreciated William's honesty. I'll talk to Noah about the reception. I can't promise we'll come, but we'll consider it. That's all I ask. William stood, checking his watch. I should get back. Diane will be wondering where I've gone. His smile was tinged with sadness. 40 years of marriage to someone with her conditions teaches you to anticipate her anxieties. As he turned to leave, I found myself asking, why have you stayed with her all this time? It can't have been easy. William paused. Because beneath the controlling behaviors and fears, there's a brilliant, passionate woman who loves fiercely, sometimes too fiercely, and because I made a commitment. His expression softened. But also because I've seen how hard she works to fight. Her own demons. The Diane you know is actually much improved from the woman she was 20 years ago. That was a sobering thought. I thanked William for meeting me and promised to let him know about the reception by the next day. On my walk home, I thought about families and the complex webs of love, obligation, and history that bind them together. Noah and I were just beginning our story, with the freedom to shape our relationship intentionally. Diane and William had 4 decades of patterns, some healthy, some deeply problematic, that couldn't simply be unwound overnight. When I got home, Noah was in the backyard, cleaning up the garden beds we'd neglected during wedding planning, and our honeymoon. I showed him Diane's letter and recounted my conversation with William. My mother has a mental health condition, he said slowly, absorbing the information. That explains a lot, actually. He set down his gardening, tools and sat on the back steps, processing. I always thought she was just controlling because that's who she was. I never considered there might be more to it. It doesn't excuse what she did, I reminded him gently. No, but it helps me understand it better. He looked up at me. What do you think about the reception? Should we go? I sat beside him on the steps, feeling the afternoon sun warm on my face. Part of me is still hurt and angry about what she did, but another part recognizes that she's trying, in her own way, to make amends. Noah nodded. And my dad? He's really advocating for her, which is new for him. He loves her, I said simply. Despite everything, he sees something in her worth loving and fighting for. That says something. We sat in silence for a while, watching the light shift through the trees in our small yard. Finally, Noah spoke. Let's go to the reception, but we go in with clear eyes. If she keeps her promise to acknowledge what happened and apologize, maybe there's hope for a better relationship going forward. If not, if this is just another manipulation, then we'll need to establish much firmer boundaries. The decision made, we finished our garden work together, talking about ordinary things, dinner plans, a movie we wanted to see, the leaky faucet that needed fixing, domestic conversations that grounded us in our shared life, reminding us of what was most important. That evening, Noah called his father to accept the invitation. William's relief was audible, though he tried to keep his tone measured. We'll see you Saturday then, 4 o'clock. As we prepared for bed that night, I found myself staring at our wedding photo, now framed on our bedroom wall. Noah and I gazing at each other, surrounded by autumn colors, our faces alight with joy despite the drama that had preceded the moment. Whatever happens with your mom, I said to Noah, that day was still perfect in its own way, because we stood up for what mattered to us. He came to stand beside me, wrapping an arm around my waist. And we always will. Saturday arrived crisp and clear, another beautiful October day. I chose my outfit carefully, a burgundy dress that echoed our wedding colors, formal enough to respect the occasion, but not so formal that it suggested I was trying to impress Diane. Noah wore dark slacks and a navy blazer, simple but elegant. Ready? He asked as we pulled up to his parents' colonial home, its manicured garden now decorated with tasteful fall arrangements and soft white lights strung along the pathways. I took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. William met us at the door, his relief at seeing us evident in the way his shoulders relaxed. Thank you for coming, he said, embracing Noah, and then, more carefully, me. The house was transformed for the occasion. The formal dining room had been opened up to the adjacent living spaces, creating a flow for the 30 or so guests already mingling with drinks in hand. I recognized many faces from the wedding, close family friends, Noah's colleagues, a few of my friends whom Diane had surprisingly included. And there, in the center of it all, was Diane herself. She wore a deep green dress, her hair and makeup impeccable as always. But something was different, perhaps a slight softening around her eyes, or the way she seemed to be hanging back rather than directing traffic as she usually would at her events. When she saw us, she visibly steeled herself before approaching. Her smile seemed forced, but not in the calculated way I was accustomed to, more like someone genuinely trying to push through discomfort. "Noah, Elena," she said, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "Thank you for coming." Noah's response was reserved but civil. "The house looks beautiful, Mom." An awkward silence fell. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid hanging. Between us, the history of hurt and misunderstanding that couldn't be erased with a single party, no matter how elegant. Diane broke the silence first. "I understand if you're still angry. You have every right to be." She glanced at William, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I've asked everyone to gather in about half an hour. I have something I need to say to all our guests, especially to the two of you." With that, she excused herself to check on something in the kitchen, leaving Noah and me to circulate among the guests. Many expressed how happy they were to see us, asking about our honeymoon, and carefully avoiding mention of the wedding ceremony drama, though I caught more than a few curious glances, as if they were wondering how we were handling being in Diane's house again. Riley arrived fashionably late, hugging me tightly and whispering, "I'm here for moral support, and also to witness whatever's about to happen, because this I've got to see." At precisely 5 o'clock, William gently tapped a spoon against his crystal glass, calling for everyone's attention. The room quieted as he thanked everyone for coming to celebrate Noah and Elena's marriage. "As many of you know," he said, his voice steady, "our family has had some challenges recently. But today is about moving forward with honesty and love." He turned to Diane. "My wife has something she would like to say." Diane moved to stand beside him, her usual poise momentarily faltering as she looked out at the assembled guests. Her gaze finally settled on Noah and me, standing together near the fireplace. "First," she began, "I want to thank Elena and Noah for being here today. After what happened at their wedding, they would have been justified in refusing my invitation." She paused, visibly gathering her courage. "For those who weren't at the ceremony, and for those who were and deserve an explanation, I need to acknowledge what I did." The room was utterly silent now, everyone focused on Diane's unexpected confession. "I took it upon myself to rewrite Noah and Elena's wedding vows without their knowledge or consent. I replaced the personal promises they had written with words that reflected my values, not theirs. In doing so, I violated their trust and attempted to impose my vision of marriage onto their most sacred moment." I felt Noah's hand tighten around mine as his mother continued. "My actions were wrong, deeply, unequivocally wrong. They came from my own fears and need for control, not from love." Her voice wavered slightly. "When Elena discovered what I had done and chose to speak her own vows instead of reading mine, she wasn't being disrespectful as I claimed at the time. She was standing up for the integrity of her marriage and her right to enter it on her own terms." Diane turned to face us directly now. "Elena, Noah, I am truly sorry, not just for what I did that day, but for the many ways I tried to control your wedding planning and impose my vision onto your lives. I'm working to understand why I behave this way and to change these patterns." The vulnerability in her voice was something I'd never heard before from this woman who had always projected nothing but unwavering confidence. "I can't promise I'll never overstep again," she continued. "But I can promise to listen when you tell me I have, to respect the boundaries you set, and to remember that the most important thing is not having things done my way, but having you in my life." She looked around at the other guests. "I've spent the past 2 weeks telling various stories about what happened at the church, stories that minimized my role and exaggerated Elena's reaction. Those stories were untrue, and I apologize to anyone I misled." With that, she stepped back, looking both exhausted and somehow lighter, as if the public accountability had lifted a burden she'd been carrying. William raised his glass. "To Noah and Elena, may your marriage be blessed with love, honesty, and mutual respect. And may our family learn to support that marriage in ways that honor your independence while celebrating your place in our lives." As glasses were raised around the room, I caught Diane's eye. For perhaps the first time since I'd met her, her expression was completely unguarded, a mixture of remorse, hope, and genuine vulnerability. I gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, not quite forgiveness yet, but recognition of the courage it had taken to speak so honestly. The party resumed its flow, but with a different energy now, as if a fog had lifted, allowing more authentic conversations. Noah was deep in discussion with his father, while Riley chatted animatedly with Grace and some of my other friends. I found myself alone by the dessert table when Diane approached again, more hesitant than I'd ever seen her. "That can't have been easy," I said when she didn't immediately speak. She laughed softly, without humor. "Nothing about the past 2 weeks has been easy, but necessary." She carefully selected her words. "Dr. Martin says I need to practice accepting when things aren't under my control. All of this, is new territory for me." "For all of us," I acknowledged. "I never expected to start my marriage with a public confrontation with my mother-in-law." "No, I imagine you didn't." Diane adjusted a fork that had fallen slightly, out of alignment with the others. "I've been asking myself why your vows threatened me so much, why I felt I had to change them." She met my eyes directly. "I think I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of a marriage so different from my own. Of a woman strong enough to set boundaries I've spent decades ignoring. Of losing my son to a life I don't control or fully understand." She picked up a small dessert plate. My generation was taught that marriage meant certain things: specific roles, responsibilities, sacrifices. Your vows rejected all of that. "They rejected rigid roles and unequal expectations," I corrected gently, "not commitment or family." Diane nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to see that. It's uncomfortable, but maybe necessary." She looked toward Noah, still talking with his father. "He's happier with you than I've ever seen him, more himself." "That's all I want," I said truthfully, "for both of us to be ourselves, together." "I'm trying to understand that." Diane straightened, her already perfect posture. "This reception isn't a fresh start, I know that. But perhaps it can be a turning point." As she moved away to attend to her other guests, I found myself reflecting on the nature of change, how difficult it is, how much courage it requires, especially later in life when patterns have calcified into seeming permanence. Diane had decades of controlling behavior to unlearn, fears to face, and damage to repair. It wouldn't happen overnight, and there would surely be setbacks along the way. But watching her now, moving through her carefully, planned reception with slightly less rigidity than before, I saw something I hadn't expected: possibility. The possibility of a relationship that, while never simple, might eventually become something healthier than what had come before. Noah found me a few minutes later, slipping his arm around my waist. "You okay?" "Surprisingly, yes," I said, leaning into him. "Your mom and I just had what might be our first honest conversation." "Minor miracle," he observed with a small smile. "Dad says she's been working hard with her therapist. This whole thing was apparently a wake-up call for both of them." I thought about William's 40 years of managing Diane's episodes, of loving her through her struggles, of the commitment that had kept him by her side despite everything. There was wisdom there, alongside the enabling patterns he was now trying to break. "What do you think?" Noah asked. "Can we find a way forward with them?" I looked around the room, at Riley chatting with Noah's colleagues, at Grace showing William photos on her phone, at Diane carefully ensuring every guest had what they needed without micromanaging as she once would have. This makeshift family, with all its flaws and complexities. "I think we already are," I said. "It won't be perfect. There will be setbacks and difficult conversations. But yes, I think there's a way forward." Noah kissed my temple softly. That's all I needed to hear. As the reception continued around us, I reflected on our journey. So far, from that first contentious dinner with the Carters to the confrontation at the altar, to this moment of tentative reconciliation. None of it had gone according to plan, but perhaps that was the point. Our marriage had begun with a powerful statement about creating our own path, about resisting others' attempts to define us. Now came the harder part, extending that same philosophy to our relationships with family, not cutting them off when they failed us, but not compromising our core values either. finding that delicate balance between boundary and bridge. The weeks following Diane's reception marked a delicate new phase in our family dynamics. Noah and I settled into married life in our cozy bungalow, establishing routines and traditions that were uniquely ours. On Sundays, we made elaborate brunches together, trying recipes from around the world. Weeknights often found us working side by side at the dining table, Noah reviewing environmental impact reports while I sketched character designs for my children's books. We were building the partnership we had promised in our vows, day by ordinary day. Our relationship with Noah's parents evolved more cautiously. William called once a week, usually on Thursday evenings, to check in. These conversations were easy with him. He asked about our projects, shared small updates about his own life, and never pushed for more involvement than we offered. Diane's approach was more tentative. She sent carefully worded emails, rather than calling directly, sharing local news or articles she thought might interest us, but always ending with some variation of, "No need to respond if you're busy." "She's trying," Noah observed one evening after reading her latest message. "I never thought I'd see my mother this restrained." I nodded, watching over his shoulder as he composed a brief but friendly reply. "Do you think it will last?" He considered this as he hit send. "I don't know. Part of me is waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her to revert to her old patterns. But another part hopes this experience has genuinely changed something for her. For all of us," I added, thinking of how the wedding confrontation had forced us to establish boundaries early in our marriage that might otherwise have taken years to define. 3 months after our wedding, as the Pacific Northwest winter wrapped Portland in its characteristic gray drizzle, Noah received an unexpected call from his father. "Dad wants us to come to dinner tomorrow night," he said, frowning slightly, as he ended the call. He was being oddly cryptic about it. I looked up from the storyboard I was sketching. "Did he say why?" "Just that they have something important to discuss with us." Noah ran a hand through his hair. He assured me, "It's nothing bad, but it feels significant." We speculated about the purpose throughout the evening and the next day. Was Diane planning another event that would require our participation? Had there been a health scare they needed to share? Was William finally retiring from the family business? By the time we pulled up to the Carters' colonial home the following evening, our curiosity had reached its peak. William opened the door before we could ring the bell, greeting us with warm hugs that held a hint of nervousness. The house smelled of Diane's signature pot roast, comfort food she reserved for important occasions. "Thank you for coming," William said, taking our coats. "Diane's just finishing up in the kitchen." The formal dining room was set with the family's best china, candles lit, flowers arranged in the center of the table. Whatever this dinner was about, they were making an effort to mark it as special. Diane emerged from the kitchen carrying a serving dish, her expression a mixture of determination and apprehension. "Noah, Elena, thank you for coming on such short notice." She set down the roast and briefly touched my shoulder, a small gesture of affection that still felt new and tentative between us. Dinner began with carefully neutral conversation, comments on the persistent rain, updates on Noah's latest restoration project, questions about my current book illustrations. It wasn't until dessert was served, Diane's apple tart with homemade vanilla ice cream, that William cleared his throat and exchanged a meaningful glance with his wife. "We asked you here tonight because we've made some significant decisions," he began, folding his hands on the table. "Decisions that will affect the family and, by extension, both of you." Noah straightened in his chair. "What kind of decisions?" Diane took a deep breath. "After 42 years, I'm stepping down from active management of Carter Furnishings." The announcement hung in the air, momentous and unexpected. Diane's identity had always been inextricably linked to the family business. Even when Noah was growing up, she had run the company with an iron grip, growing it from a single storefront to a chain of high-end furniture boutiques across the Pacific Northwest. Completely stepping down? Noah asked, clearly shocked. But you've always said you'd never retire. Not retiring, Diane clarified quickly. Just repositioning. I'll remain on the board, but day-to-day operations will transfer to Amanda. Amanda was Noah's older sister, who had been groomed for leadership for years, working her way through every department of the company. Why now? I asked, watching Diane carefully. William and Diane exchanged glances again, a silent communication born of decades together. My therapist suggested it might be healthy for me to loosen my grip on some aspects of my life, Diane said with visible effort. To practice not being in control of everything. Noah set down his fork, stunned. This is because of what happened at the wedding, isn't it? Diane's composure faltered slightly. It was a wake-up call, yes, but not in the way you might think. She smoothed her napkin, a familiar gesture when gathering her thoughts. When I tried to control your wedding vows, when I saw how deeply that hurt both of you, it forced me to look at other areas where my need for control might be causing harm. The business has always been my pride, my creation, she continued. But I've been holding on so tightly that Amanda hasn't had room to truly lead, despite her title as Deputy CEO. I've been micromanaging decisions that should be hers, second-guessing her initiatives, requiring her to get my approval for matters well within her purview. This was a level of self-awareness I'd never expected from Diane. I glanced at Noah, whose expression mirrored my surprise. There's more, William added. We're also making changes to our estate planning and the business succession structure. Noah stiffened beside me. The family business had always been a point of tension between him and his parents. Though he'd chosen a different career path, there remained an unspoken expectation that he would someday return to Carter Furnishings, perhaps in a role that aligned with his environmental engineering background. The pressure had ebbed and flowed over the years but had never fully disappeared. We've restructured things, William explained, to reflect and respect the life choices both of our children have made. Amanda will inherit majority ownership of the business, as she's dedicated her career to it. But Noah, we've set aside other assets of equivalent value for you, without any strings attached to the family business. No expectations that I eventually join the company? Noah asked, his voice carefully neutral. None, Diane said firmly. Your father and I have come to understand, belatedly, I admit, that true parental love means supporting your children's choices, not imposing your own vision on their lives. She looked directly at Noah. You've built a career that makes a difference in the world, one that brings you genuine fulfillment. We're proud of that, even if it took us too long to show it properly. Noah was momentarily speechless. I reached for his hand under the table, feeling the tension in his fingers gradually release. There's one more thing, William continued. We've also established a charitable foundation that will eventually be directed by both of you and Amanda, according to your individual areas of interest. Noah, we thought the environmental conservation arm might be meaningful for you to oversee. And Elena, there's an arts education component that could align with your work in children's literature, if you're interested. I was taken aback to be included so specifically in their planning. That's extremely generous. Your family now, William said simply. Diane looked at me with an expression I'd never seen directed my way before. Something like respect, perhaps even a hint of admiration. The foundation was actually my idea. I've been thinking about legacy lately, what it really means to leave something meaningful behind. Not just wealth or a successful business, but values that extend beyond our immediate family. We spent the next hour discussing the details of their plans. The foundation was still in its formative stages, with the legal framework being established, but plenty of room for Noah, Amanda, and me to shape its direction and priorities. It was clear that Diane had put significant thought into aligning the foundation's potential focus areas with our individual passions: environmental restoration, arts education, community development. As we prepared to leave, Diane walked us to the door while William retrieved our coats. In that brief moment alone, she turned to me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that I've been listening to the recordings of our sessions." "Recordings?" I asked, confused. "My therapy sessions," she clarified. "Dr. Martins records them so I can review them later, identify patterns I might miss in the moment." She straightened a small decorative box on the entryway table, a familiar nervous gesture. "In one session, I realized I've never actually told you that I admire your strength. The way you stood up for yourself and Noah at the wedding. It was difficult for me to accept in the moment, but I've come to respect it enormously." The admission clearly cost her, but it felt genuine in a way our previous interactions rarely had. "Thank you for telling me that," I said, "and for everything tonight. I know these changes can't have been easy decisions." A flicker of her old defensiveness surfaced briefly. "They weren't made lightly, I assure you." "I never thought they were," I replied carefully. "It takes courage to re-examine long-held plans and priorities." She seemed to consider this, then nodded slightly. "Perhaps that's something we have in common then. Courage." It wasn't quite friendship, not yet. But it was an acknowledgement of mutual respect, a foundation we might be able to build upon. On the drive home, Noah was uncharacteristically quiet, processing the evening's revelations. "Are you okay?" I asked as we turned onto our street, the headlights sweeping across our little bungalow. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Part of me is waiting for the catch, the hidden expectation. My mother has never been this accommodating before." "Do you think it's not genuine?" He parked in our driveway and turned off the engine, sitting in the dark car for a moment. "No, I think it is genuine. That's what's so disorienting. For as long as I can remember, I've been bracing against her attempts to control my life. Now she's explicitly releasing that control, and I don't quite know how to respond." I understood his uncertainty. For years, Noah's relationship with his parents, particularly his mother, had been defined by a careful dance of compliance and resistance. Now the music had changed, and they were all learning new steps. "We don't have to decide anything tonight," I reminded him. "About the foundation, about any of it. We can take our time." He nodded, reaching for my hand in the darkness. "Have I mentioned lately how grateful I am that you stood your ground at our wedding? If you hadn't, if we'd just gone along with her rewritten vows, I wonder if any of this would be happening now." It was a sobering thought. That moment at the altar had been painful and public, but it had catalyzed changes that might otherwise have taken years, if they happened at all. "Maybe we should send Dr. Martins a thank you note," I suggested with a small smile. Noah's laugh broke the tension. "Maybe we should." The foundation became a surprising point of connection between us and the Carters over the following months. William scheduled regular meetings to discuss its development, always careful to work around our schedules and preferences. These gatherings had a different energy than previous family interactions, more collaborative, less hierarchical. Even Diane, though clearly accustomed to directing such projects, made visible efforts to listen more than she spoke, to invite rather than instruct. By early spring, the foundation had a name: the Carter Family Environmental and Arts Initiative, and a preliminary mission statement that reflected input from all of us, including Amanda, who joined most meetings virtually, from her office at Carter Furnishings headquarters. During one such meeting in late March, as we finalized plans for the Foundation's first community grant cycle, Diane surprised us all by suggesting that the inaugural grant recipients should be announced at a public event. "Nothing too elaborate," she added quickly, noting our expressions. "Just something to establish the Foundation's presence in the community. Perhaps at the botanical gardens? They have that new sustainable event space that would align well with our environmental focus. It was a reasonable suggestion, but Noah and I exchanged cautious glances. The last event Diane had planned had resulted in our wedding vow confrontation. Though she had shown remarkable growth since then, the prospect of her organizing another public gathering made us understandably wary. William, ever attuned to the undercurrents between his wife and son, cleared his throat. Perhaps Elena and Noah might like to take the lead on planning the event? With your guidance, of course, Diane. The old Diane would have bristled at the suggestion, insisted on maintaining control. The woman sitting across from us now looked momentarily conflicted, then nodded. That's an excellent idea. You two probably have a fresh perspective that would appeal to younger donors and grantees. Again, I found myself genuinely surprised by her willingness to cede control. Noah looked equally taken aback, but recovered quickly. We'd be happy to organize it, he said, squeezing my hand under the table. Elena has a great eye for these things. Diane's smile was small but sincere. She does indeed. Her wedding choices were actually quite inspired. The admission seemed to cost her something, but she pushed through it. The autumn color palette, the outdoor reception, it all photographed beautifully. Coming from Diane, this was high praise indeed. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by the belated affirmation. The botanical gardens would be perfect for the announcement event. We could incorporate elements that showcase both the environmental and arts aspects of the foundation. The discussion shifted to potential dates and guest lists. I found myself watching Diane with new eyes. The rigid, controlling woman who had tried to hijack our wedding was still visible in glimpses. The way she straightened papers that didn't need straightening. Her slight flinch when Noah suggested a more casual dress code than she would prefer. But these impulses now seemed to be recognized and managed rather than indulged. She was trying, genuinely trying, to change patterns that had defined her for decades. Later that evening, as Noah and I worked on preliminary ideas for the foundation event, he voiced what I'd been thinking. She's really working on herself, isn't she? I nodded, sketching a rough layout for the garden space. It can't be easy at her age, challenging such ingrained behaviors. No, he agreed thoughtfully. I keep thinking about what my dad said that day you met him for coffee, that the Diane we know is actually much improved from who she was 20 years ago. If that's true, and she's still making progress now. It shows remarkable dedication, I finished for him. Whatever her flaws, your mother doesn't lack persistence. Noah smiled wryly. True. She's always been relentless when she sets her mind to something. I guess I'm just not used to that quality being directed toward personal growth rather than getting her way. The foundation announcement event took shape over the following weeks, becoming a project that unexpectedly strengthened our relationship with the Carters. Noah and I took the lead as suggested, but included Diane and William in key decisions, finding a balance that honored their experience while maintaining our creative direction. One afternoon in early April, Diane called and asked if she could stop by our house to review some details for the event. It was the first time she had suggested coming to our home, rather than having us come to theirs. A small but significant shift in the power dynamic between us. Of course, I said, surprised but pleased by the gesture. We're both working from home today. Would 3 o'clock work? There was a brief pause before she replied, That would be fine. Should I bring anything? Coffee, perhaps? The question held a note of uncertainty that I'd rarely heard from her. Just yourself is fine, I assured her. We have plenty of coffee. After hanging up, I glanced around our living room with new eyes, suddenly aware of how Diane might see it. Our decor was an eclectic mix of vintage finds, handcrafted items, and a few quality pieces we'd splurged on when we moved in together. It was comfortable and personal, but very different from the formal elegance of the Carter home. Is something Wrong? Noah asked, looking up from his laptop where he'd been working at the dining table. Your mother's coming over at 3 to discuss the foundation event, I said, straightening a stack of books on the coffee table. His eyebrows rose. Here? That's new. He watched me adjust a throw pillow. Are you tidying for my mother? I laughed, realizing what I was doing. I guess I am, force of habit. Noah closed his laptop and came to wrap his arms around me from behind. Our home is perfect exactly as it is. If she doesn't appreciate our style, that's her problem. Not ours. He was right, of course. I let go of the sudden urge to make our space more Diane-appropriate and returned to my illustration work until the doorbell rang promptly at 3. Diane stood on our porch holding a small gift bag despite my assurance that she didn't need to bring anything. She was dressed more casually than I'd ever seen her for a non-exercise occasion. Tailored slacks and a simple cashmere sweater, rather than one of her usual structured ensembles. Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice, she said as I invited her in. I brought some of those shortbread cookies Noah always liked as a child, from the bakery on Hawthorne. The thoughtful gesture touched me. That's so kind. Noah will be thrilled. He was just talking about those cookies last week. As she entered our living room, I watched her take in the space. The old Diane would have immediately found something to critique. The vintage reading lamp that didn't quite match the side table, the gallery wall of mismatched frames, the colorful throw rugs layered over our original hardwood floors. This Diane simply said, "What a charming home. It suits you both." Noah emerged from his home office, his surprise at seeing his mother in our living room giving way to genuine pleasure at the sight of the familiar bakery bag. Are those Herbert's shortbread? You remembered. Of course I remembered, Diane said, a hint of her old crispness returning. I'm your mother. The three of us settled in the living room with coffee and cookies, spreading foundation documents across the coffee table. The discussion was productive and surprisingly comfortable. Diane had brought thoughtful suggestions for the event, but presented them as options rather than directives, a subtlety that wasn't lost on either Noah or me. As we wrapped up the foundation business, Diane lingered, seeming reluctant to leave. Your garden is coming along nicely, she observed, looking through our back windows at the raised beds where early spring vegetable seedlings were just beginning to emerge. William mentioned you're growing vegetables this year. We're trying, Noah said. Elena has more of a green thumb than I do, despite my environmental background. I've always found gardening quite therapeutic, Diane said, surprising us both. In my younger days, before the business took over everything, I had quite an extensive herb garden. This was a side of Diane neither of us had seen before, a glimpse of the woman she might have been if ambition and control hadn't become her defining characteristics. Would you like to see what we've planted? I offered impulsively. Something like pleasure flickered across her face. I'd like that. Very much. The three of us walked through the kitchen and out the back door to our modest yard. As I showed Diane our vegetable starts and explained our composting system, she listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering knowledgeable suggestions about companion planting and natural pest deterrents. You know, she said, kneeling carefully to examine a row of emerging pea shoots, if you're interested, I have some heritage tomato seedlings that would do well in this corner bed. They're from seeds I've been saving for years. The offer was unexpected, a sharing of something personal, a potential collaboration that had nothing to do with social appearances or family obligations. We'd love that, I said, meeting Noah's surprised but approving gaze over his mother's head. Maybe you could help us plant them when they're ready. Diane stood, brushing soil from her hands with fastidious care. I'd like that. A moment of vulnerability crossed her face. It's been a long time since I've had my hands in the earth. Too long, perhaps. As she prepared to leave about an hour later, Diane paused at our front door. Thank you for this afternoon, for letting me into your home, your garden. I know our relationship has been Complicated. It's getting less complicated, Noah said, his tone gentle but honest. Day by day. Diane nodded, her usual perfect posture softening slightly. I hope so. I'm trying to understand that there are many ways to be a family, not just the way I always envisioned. After she left, Noah and I stood in our doorway watching her car disappear down the street. That was unexpected, he said finally. My mother, talking about gardening and bringing cookies. If you'd told me 6 months ago this would happen, I'd have thought you were hallucinating. I leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder. People can change, even Diane Carter. Especially Diane Carter, it seems, he replied, kissing the top of my head. Once she commits to something, even personal growth, she's all in. The foundation announcement event at the Botanical Gardens was scheduled for early May, when the spring blooms would be at their peak. As the date approached, we settled into a surprisingly functional working relationship with the Carters. Diane still occasionally lapsed into her controlling tendencies, but now seemed able to catch herself, stepping back when she recognized she was overstepping. 2 days before the event, I received an unexpected email from Dr. Julia Martins, Diane's therapist. The subject line read simply, "With Diane's permission." Curious and slightly apprehensive, I opened it. Dear Elena, I am writing to you with Diane Carter's full knowledge and consent. As her therapist, I maintain strict confidentiality, but Diane has specifically asked me to share something with you that she finds difficult to express directly. In our recent sessions, Diane has been working on articulating the profound impact your actions at your wedding have had on her life and her journey toward healthier relationships. She describes that moment, when you refused to read the vows she had rewritten, as a turning point in how she understands herself and her patterns of control. While the experience was initially deeply painful for her, she has come to see it as a necessary awakening. In her words, Elena showed me a kind of courage I've never possessed. The courage to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it disrupts carefully laid plans. Diane has authorized me to tell you that your boundaries that day did not damage your relationship as she initially feared. Rather, they created the possibility for a more authentic connection based on mutual respect rather than control. She hopes that in time, she will be able to tell you this herself. For now, she wanted you to know the significant positive role you have played in her growth process. With kind regards, Dr. Julia Martins, PhD licensed clinical psychologist. I read the email twice, then called Noah over to read it as well. He stood silently for a moment after finishing, then sat heavily on the couch beside me. My mother authorized her therapist to tell you that you were right to stand up to her, he said slowly, as if testing whether the words made sense when spoken aloud. I'm not sure which is more surprising, that she recognizes it, or that she found a way to let you know. It must have been difficult for her, I said, thinking of Diane's lifelong aversion to admitting any kind of mistake or misjudgment. To acknowledge this, even through her therapist. Noah nodded, still processing. It's a huge step for her. Monumental, really. That evening, I composed a careful reply to Dr. Martins. Dear Dr. Martins, thank you for your email. I'm deeply touched that Diane wanted to share these reflections with me, and I appreciate her finding a way to do so that felt comfortable for her. Please let her know that I see and value the work she's been doing. The changes in our family dynamic over these past months have been meaningful, and I'm grateful for her efforts to build a healthier relationship with both Noah and me. I believe that difficult moments often contain opportunities for growth, if we're brave enough to face them honestly. Diane has shown remarkable courage in doing exactly that. With appreciation, Elena Mitchell Carter. I showed the response to Noah before sending it. He read it with a thoughtful expression. You really mean this, don't you? It's not just being polite. I really mean it, I confirmed. Your mother is far from perfect, and I don't expect our relationship will ever be simple. But I respect how hard she's working to change lifelong patterns. That takes real courage. Noah pulled me into a tight embrace. Have I told you lately how amazing you are? I laughed against his shoulder. You might have mentioned it. Well, you are. Most people would have written my mother off after what she did at our wedding. You somehow found a way to hold her accountable without closing the door on redemption. I thought about this as we went about our evening routine, the quiet intimacy of making dinner together, reviewing plans for the foundation event, discussing a particularly challenging illustration I was working on for my latest book. Our marriage wasn't perfect either. We had disagreements, miscommunications, occasional frustrations with each other's habits or perspectives. But we faced them together with honesty and respect, just as we had promised in those wedding vows that Diane had tried to replace. Perhaps that was the most important lesson from all of this, that real love, whether between spouses or between parents and children, requires both honesty and grace. The courage to speak uncomfortable truths and the compassion to create space for growth and change. 2 days later, as we made final preparations for the foundation announcement event, I received a text from Diane. Elena, I hope this isn't an imposition, but I wondered if you might have time for coffee tomorrow morning. There's something I'd like to discuss with you before the event. Just the two of us, if that's comfortable for you. I showed the message to Noah, who raised his eyebrows but nodded encouragingly. If you're up for it, I think you should go. You don't mind? I asked, surprised by his ready agreement. He shook his head. I think it might be good for both of you. And honestly, I'm curious what she wants to discuss. I replied to Diane's text, suggesting a cafe halfway between our homes for 10 a.m. the next day. Her response came almost immediately. Perfect. Thank you, Elena. I'll see you there. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, wondering what Diane wanted to discuss. Despite all the progress we'd made, the prospect of a one-on-one conversation still made me slightly nervous. Would she have last-minute demands about the foundation event? Had she reverted to her old controlling ways when faced with the stress of a public gathering? Or was this something else entirely? The next morning was bright and clear, one of those perfect spring days that make Portland feel magical after months of gray skies and rain. I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, choosing a table by the window where the morning sunlight created patterns of warmth and shadow across the worn wooden surface. Diane arrived precisely on time, dressed in a casual elegance that seemed to be her new standard. Silk blouse, tailored pants, subtle jewelry. She carried a small gift bag, similar to the one she'd brought to our house, but with more elaborate tissue paper peeking from the top. Thank you for meeting me, she said, setting the bag carefully on an empty chair before taking a seat across from me. I've ordered us both coffee, a mocha for you, if that's still your preference. The fact that she remembered my coffee order and had taken the initiative to order for me was simultaneously thoughtful and a tiny echo of her controlling tendencies. But I chose to focus on the thoughtfulness. That's perfect, thank you. Our drinks arrived, and for a moment we sat in not quite comfortable silence, each waiting for the other to begin. Finally, Diane straightened her already perfect posture and met my eyes directly. I received your message from Dr. Martens. Thank you for your graciousness. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. It's still difficult for me to speak directly about certain things, she admitted, her fingers tightening slightly around her coffee cup. About mistakes I've made, about feelings that seem messy. Dr. Martens is helping with that, but it's an ongoing process. I understand, I said, and I found that I genuinely did. Whatever her flaws, Diane's struggle to change deeply ingrained patterns was worthy of respect. Tomorrow's event is important. To me, she continued. Not just for the foundation, though I believe deeply in its mission, but because it represents something I've rarely allowed in my life, a true collaboration between us, between our different perspectives and strengths. She reached for the gift bag and placed it between us on the table. I wanted to give you this before we're surrounded by people tomorrow. It's a thank you, and perhaps an amends of sorts. Curious, I opened the bag and carefully moved aside the tissue paper. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted from what looked like reclaimed wood, with my initials, EMC, inlaid in a darker wood on the lid. When I lifted the hinged top, I found it lined with deep blue velvet, and nestled inside was a vintage silver pen. It was my grandmother's, Diane explained softly. She was a writer too. Not professionally, but she kept journals her entire life. When I was a girl, I used to watch her write with this pen, recording her thoughts and observations. She told me once that writing was her way of making sense of the world, of finding truth in complexity. I lifted the pen carefully. It had a pleasant weight. The silver warmed slightly from being carried in the wooden box. Diane, this is incredibly thoughtful. Are you sure you want me to have this? She nodded, a certainty in her expression that had nothing to do with her usual insistence on getting her way. My grandmother would have appreciated your courage, your unwillingness to speak words that weren't truly yours. And so do I, even though it took me too long to recognize it. The moment felt significant, not a complete transformation of our relationship, but an important step towards something healthier, more authentic. Thank you, I said simply, knowing that elaborate expressions of gratitude would only make us both uncomfortable. I'll treasure it. Diane seemed relieved by my understated response. I've been thinking about legacy recently, she said, turning her coffee cup slowly. About what we pass down through generations. Not just physical objects or wealth, but values, patterns, ways of being in the world. Is that part of why you created the foundation? I asked. She considered this. Partly, yes. I want to leave something meaningful behind. But I've also been thinking about the other kind of legacy, the invisible inheritances we receive from our families and pass on, often without realizing it. Like patterns of control? I suggested gently. Diane's smile held a hint of sadness. Exactly like that. My mother was. Even more rigid than I am, if you can imagine that. Her life was defined by propriety, by appearances, by never showing vulnerability. I inherited that from her, along with the anxiety that drives it. This was the most personal conversation we'd ever had. I sensed its significance for Diane, her tentative venture into territory that had always been forbidden in her world, honest acknowledgement of family dysfunction. But patterns can be broken, I offered. That's what you're doing now. She nodded, something like determination settling into her features. That's what I'm trying to do. For myself, for my relationship with Noah, with you. And perhaps someday, for my relationship with my grandchildren, should you choose to have them. The mention of potential grandchildren would have felt presumptuous, even manipulative from the old Diane. From this newer, more self-aware version, it felt like a hope offered without demand. No pressure on that front, she added quickly, correctly reading my expression. Whenever or if ever that happens, it will be your decision entirely. I'm simply hoping that by doing this work now, I might be a different kind of grandmother than my mother was, a better one. I think you will be, I said honestly. We talked for another hour, moving from these deeper waters to more practical matters regarding the foundation event. When we finally parted, there was a new ease between us. Not the seamless comfort of a naturally close relationship, but the hard-earned understanding that comes from working through genuine conflict with honesty and goodwill. As I drove home, the wooden box safely tucked in my bag, I reflected on the journey our family had taken since that dramatic moment at the altar. The path had been neither straight nor smooth, but it had led us somewhere I couldn't have imagined on our wedding day, to a place where Diane could give me a treasured family heirloom, where we could speak honestly about painful truths, where we could build something meaningful together despite our differences. Noah was waiting eagerly when I arrived home. How did it go? What did she want? I showed him the wooden box and the silver pen, explaining their significance. As I related Diane's words about legacy and her hope to break generational patterns, his expression shifted from curiosity to something deeper, a complex mix of surprise, hope, and lingering caution. "It's strange," he said finally. "All my life, I've been bracing against her control, defining myself partly in opposition to her expectations. Now that she's changing, I almost don't know how to relate to her." "It's a good problem to have," I pointed out, adjusting to improvement rather than managing damage. He smiled, carefully returning the pen to its velvet nest. The foundation announcement at the Botanical Gardens unfolded like a dream, the kind where everything somehow aligns perfectly despite your lingering fears. Spring flowers bloomed in vibrant displays along the pathways, their fragrance carried on a gentle breeze as guests mingled in the sustainable pavilion Noah and I had selected. Local artists, whose work would be supported by the arts education branch of the foundation, had created installations throughout the gardens that complemented rather than competed with nature's own artistry. I watched Diane from across the gathering, noting how different she seemed from the woman who had tried to control our wedding. She moved through the crowd with her characteristic grace, but without the imperial air that had once defined her public persona. When she spoke with potential grant recipients, environmental scientists, arts educators, community organizers, she listened more than she talked, her attention focused and genuine. "She's really good at this," Noah observed, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of the local sparkling cider we'd chosen instead of champagne. "Connecting with people when she's not trying to control everything." I accepted the glass with a smile. It's like watching someone discover a talent they never knew they had. William joined us, looking proud and slightly amazed. 43 years of marriage, and she can still surprise me. He nodded toward Diane, who was deep in conversation with the director of a youth arts program from a historically underserved neighborhood. 6 months ago, she would have dominated that conversation, explained to that woman exactly how to run her program more efficiently. "And now?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "Now she's asking questions, learning about challenges she's never had to face personally." William's expression softened. "It's like watching her become more fully herself, if that makes sense. Not an entirely different person, but a more complete version of who she's always been." The formal announcement program began shortly after, with William welcoming everyone and explaining the foundation's creation. Noah spoke next, outlining the environmental initiatives with passion and clarity. I followed with a brief presentation on the arts education component, sharing stories from my own experience of how creative expression had shaped my life opportunities. When it was Diane's turn to speak, she stepped to the microphone with her usual poise but with something new in her demeanor, a kind of openness that hadn't been there before. "The Carter Family Environmental and Arts Initiative represents many things," she began. "A commitment to our community, a belief in the transformative power of both nature and creativity, a legacy we hope will extend beyond our lifetimes." She paused, her gaze finding Noah and me in the audience. "But it also represents something more personal, my own journey toward understanding what truly matters." A hush fell over the gathering. This wasn't the polished society matron speech anyone had expected from Diane Carter. "For most of my life, I've equated control with care," she continued. "I believed that managing every detail, directing every outcome, was the best way to show love for my family and commitment to my community. I was wrong." She looked down briefly, collecting herself, then continued with quiet strength. "Real care, I'm learning, involves trust. Trust in others' capabilities and judgment. Trust in their unique vision and path. The kind of trust my son Noah and his wife Elena have shown in inviting me to be part of this foundation after I failed them so profoundly at their wedding. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Many of these people had been at our wedding, had witnessed Diane's attempt to control our vows and her dramatic exit from the church. That she would reference it so directly, in such a public forum, was astonishing. This foundation isn't about imposing our vision on others, Diane continued, her voice steady. It's about providing resources and support so that talented, committed people can pursue their own visions for environmental stewardship and artistic expression. It's about enabling rather than controlling, about trust rather than dominance. She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her face. I have a great deal more to learn about this approach, but I'm fortunate to have excellent teachers in my family. Thank you all for being here today as we begin this new chapter. The applause that followed was warm and sustained. As Diane rejoined us, I noticed something I'd never seen before, a faint blush on her usually composed features. Was that too personal? She whispered to William. It was perfect, he assured her, taking her hand. Noah embraced his mother briefly. Thank you, he said simply. The rest of the event flowed smoothly, with guests exploring the gardens, engaging with the artists and scientists whose work the foundation would support, enjoying the local, sustainable refreshments we'd selected. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself in conversation with an older woman I didn't recognize, elegantly dressed, with keen eyes that reminded me of Diane's. You must be Elena, she said, extending her hand. I'm Margaret Whitley, Diane's older sister. I tried not to show my surprise. In all our conversations about family, Diane had rarely mentioned having a sister. It's lovely to meet you. I didn't realize you'd be joining us today. Margaret's smile held a hint of irony. I'm sure you didn't. Diane and I have had a complicated relationship over the years. Today is the first time she's invited me to a family event in nearly a decade. I had no idea, I admitted. Few people do. My sister has always been skilled at presenting exactly the image she wants the world to see. Margaret glanced across the garden to where Diane was speaking with a group of foundation supporters. Which is why her speech today was so remarkable. I barely recognized her. She's been working hard on herself, I said carefully, unsure how much Margaret knew about Diane's therapy or recent changes. So William mentioned when he called to invite me. I was skeptical, to be honest. Diane has always been rigid in her expectations of others. She studied me with interest. William says you're the catalyst for much of this change. Something about wedding vows? I felt a flush creep up my neck. It wasn't intentional. I just couldn't read vows. I hadn't written. Margaret's laugh was warm and genuine. Good for you. My sister has been surrounded by people who accommodate her demands for far too long, myself included, until I finally refused to play along. She sipped her cider thoughtfully. May I offer some advice from someone who's known Diane her entire life? Of course, I said, curious about this perspective from someone who shared Diane's history. Don't expect miracles. What you're seeing? Today, this newfound self-awareness, this willingness to acknowledge her controlling tendencies, it's genuine, but it's also fragile. Margaret's expression grew serious. Patterns like Diane's don't develop overnight, and they don't disappear overnight either. There will be backsliding. Moments when the old Diane reasserts herself, especially under stress. I understand, I assured her. We're taking things one day at a time. Smart approach. She nodded approvingly. And know that what you're seeing, this growth, this effort to change, it's extraordinary. In all my years as her sister, I've never seen Diane acknowledge her own shortcomings so openly, let alone work to address them. As Margaret moved on to greet other guests, I found myself reflecting on her words. the journey we'd been on with Diane since the wedding had indeed been remarkable. From her attempt to control our most sacred promises to her vulnerable speech today acknowledging that very tendency. But Margaret was right to caution against expecting complete transformation. Change this fundamental was always a process, never a single moment of revelation. Later that evening, as Noah and I helped the event staff with final cleanup, Diane approached us with William and an unexpected request. "I know this is last minute," she began, "but Margaret is staying with us tonight, and I wondered if you might join us for brunch tomorrow? She'd love more time with both of you, and it's been so long since we've all been together." The invitation itself wasn't surprising. Family meals had become more common in recent months, but the inclusion of Margaret, this sister who had apparently been estranged for years, added a new dimension. Noah glanced at me before responding. "We'd be happy to, Mom. Anything we can bring?" "Just yourselves," William said warmly. "And perhaps that honeysuckle jam Elena made?" Diane mentioned how much she enjoyed it last time. Another small but meaningful acknowledgement. Diane not only trying my homemade jam, but remembering and requesting it again. These little moments of connection continued to accumulate, gradually reshaping our relationship. The next morning, Noah and I arrived at the Carters' home with the requested jar of honeysuckle jam and a bouquet of flowers from our garden. Margaret answered the door, looking relaxed in casual slacks and a sweater, a marked contrast to Diane's perpetual formality. "The younger Carters," she greeted us warmly. Come in, come in. Diane's in the kitchen, if you can believe it. Actually cooking, not just supervising the housekeeper." The kitchen had always been Diane's domain in theory, but rarely in practice. She typically planned menus and directed preparation, but left the actual cooking to hired help. The sight of her in an apron, hair pulled back, hands dusted with flour as she shaped scones, was so incongruous that Noah actually stopped in the doorway. "Mom," he said, his tone conveying his disbelief. Diane looked up, a smudge of flour on her cheek. "Good morning. The quiche is just coming out of the oven. I hope you're hungry." William moved around her with the comfortable choreography of long partnership, setting out plates on the breakfast nook table. Diane decided we should try a more informal approach. Today, in the kitchen rather than the dining room. "Margaret's influence," Diane said with a wry smile toward her sister. "She always said our formal dining habits were ridiculous for family meals." "For 40 years I've been saying it," Margaret confirmed cheerfully. Today she finally listened. Brunch was served family style: quiche, scones, fresh fruit, and coffee passed around the table in a relaxed fashion that would have been unthinkable in the Carter household a year ago. The conversation flowed naturally, with Margaret sharing stories of her travels. She'd spent much of the past decade exploring Southeast Asia, and Noah discussing his latest restoration project. As we finished our meal, Diane cleared her throat slightly. "Before everyone disperses, there's something I'd like to share." She reached for a folder that had been set aside on a nearby counter. "Elena, this might be of particular interest to you." She handed me what appeared to be some kind of legal document. As I scanned the first page, I realized it was paperwork for a significant donation to a children's literacy organization I'd mentioned supporting in the past. "This is incredibly generous," I said, looking up in surprise. "But why?" "It's not just a donation," Diane explained. "It's the establishment of a scholarship program for aspiring children's book authors and illustrators from underrepresented backgrounds. We thought it might align with your values, perhaps even become part of your work with the foundation if you're interested." I was genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Not just the financial commitment, but the careful attention to causes that mattered to me. Thank you. It's perfect." "There's more," Diane continued, surprising us. Further, she turned to Noah. "Your father and I have been discussing the future of the house." Noah tensed slightly beside me. The Carter family home had always been a contentious topic, a symbol of the privilege and formality that Noah had rejected in forging his own path. "We've decided to downsize," William explained gently. "This house has served us well, but it's far more space than we need now. We're looking at apartments in that new sustainable development downtown, the one with the rooftop gardens and solar panels." Noah's eyebrows shot up. "You're moving to eco-urban towers? That's unexpected." "We thought you might approve of the environmental aspects," Diane said, a hint of her old concern for approval creeping into her voice. "And it would put us closer to the foundation offices." "It's a wonderful development," Noah assured her. Quickly, "I'm just surprised. You've always loved this house." Diane glanced around the kitchen, at the premium appliances she rarely used, the carefully selected finishes, the space designed more for impression than comfort. "It served its purpose. But I'm finding that at this stage of life, I value connection more than square footage, convenience more than status." Margaret made a sound that might have been suppressed laughter. "My sister, embracing minimalism. Never thought I'd see the day." Diane shot her a look that held more affection than annoyance. "Not minimalism, practicality. There's a difference." As the conversation continued, exploring the details of the Carters' planned move, I watched the interactions between Diane and Margaret with fascination. There was clearly a complex history there, moments of tension, old patterns of communication, lingering sensitivities. But there was also genuine affection and a willingness on both sides to move beyond past conflicts. When we finally prepared to leave several hours later, Margaret pulled me aside for a quiet word. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" I asked, confused. "For helping my sister find her way back to herself." Margaret's expression was earnest. The Diane I knew growing up, before she built all those walls of perfectionism and control, she was passionate, creative, deeply caring. Today I caught glimpses of that girl again. She squeezed my arm gently. "It means a lot to see my sister again, not just the persona she's hidden behind for decades." The idea that I had somehow helped Diane reconnect with her authentic self was both surprising and humbling. I had simply stood my ground at our wedding, protecting the integrity of our vows. I couldn't have anticipated the ripple effects that single moment of truth would create. As Noah and I drove home, I shared Margaret's comments with him. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. "It's strange to think about," he said finally. "The idea that my mother had a different self that got buried somewhere along the way. That the controlling, perfectionistic person I grew up with wasn't her whole truth." "Does it change how you feel about your childhood?" I asked gently. He considered this, turning onto our street. "Not exactly. The experiences were still real, the effects still lasting. But it does make me wonder what might have been different if she'd had the support and tools to address her anxiety earlier. If I might have known that other side of her growing up." There was no regret in his voice, just thoughtful reflection, a willingness to see his mother with new complexity rather than through the singular lens of their difficult history. Summer arrived in Portland with uncommon warmth and sunshine. Noah's environmental consulting work took him to field sites more frequently, while I finished illustrations for my latest children's book and began research for a new series. The foundation work continued to evolve, with regular meetings that grew increasingly collaborative as Diane settled into her role as contributor rather than controller. In July, William called with news that they had sold their house and would be moving to the eco-urban development in August. "We could use some help sorting through everything," he admitted. 40 years in one place, you accumulate more than you realize." Noah agreed immediately. "Just tell us when. We're happy to help." The process of helping the Carters downsize became an unexpected opportunity for deeper connection. Each weekend through July, Noah and I joined them to sort through rooms full of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to donate. The task was practical but also deeply personal, with each object holding memories and meaning. One Saturday, as Noah helped William catalog his extensive book collection, I found myself alone with Diane in her home office. The room had always intimidated me slightly. A formal space with its mahogany desk, leather chair, and walls lined with evidence of her professional accomplishments. Now cardboard boxes were stacked in one corner, gradually filling with the contents of her precisely organized life. It's strange, dismantling all of this, Diane admitted, running her fingers over the spines of leather-bound day planners that chronicled decades of her carefully scheduled existence. Liberating, but also disorienting. I nodded, understanding the complex emotions involved in such transitions. It's a lot of change at once. Yes. She opened one of the planners to a random page, smiling slightly at whatever she saw there. William thinks I'm being remarkably adaptable about all this. He doesn't realize I've been ready for change for some time. I continued sorting through a drawer of office supplies, allowing her the space to continue if she wished. After what happened at your wedding, she said. After a moment, her voice quieter, I spent a lot of time thinking about why I did what I did, why controlling those vows seemed so critically important to me. I set down the items in my hands, giving her my full attention. I realized I've spent most of my adult life trying to script everything, not just events, but people's actual words, their emotions, their responses. She closed the planner carefully, as if having the right words, the right appearances, could somehow ensure the right outcomes. That must be exhausting, I said softly. It is. It was. Diane's usual perfect posture softened slightly. When you refused to read my version of your vows, when you spoke your own truth instead, it was like watching someone step off a script I didn't even realize I was following myself. The insight surprised me with its clarity and self-awareness. I never thought of it that way. Neither did I until recently. She began filling another box with organized precision. Dr. Martin says I've been trying to control external circumstances to manage internal anxiety. A common pattern, apparently, but not a very effective one. I thought about this as we continued working, sorting decades of Diane's carefully documented life into categories for the future. Eventually, I found myself saying, in children's books, we talk about finding your voice as a central theme. Characters discovering they can speak their own truth, tell their own stories. Diane looked up, her expression thoughtful. And that's what you did at the altar, found your voice. I think maybe we all have, I suggested carefully. You included. Speaking from your authentic self at the foundation event. Reconnecting. With Margaret, making these changes in your life. That's finding your voice too. She seemed to consider this deeply, weighing my words with the same careful attention she gave to everything. I've spent so long thinking of voice as something to perfect, to polish, to make acceptable, not as something to discover. A small smile touched her lips. Perhaps I could use a children's book on the subject. Maybe I'll write you one, I offered, returning her smile. I'd like that. She handed me a small, ornately carved wooden box from her desk. Speaking of voices and stories, I'd like you to have this. It was my grandmother's, the same one whose pen I gave you earlier. Inside the box were dozens of small cards, each containing a handwritten quote or reflection in elegant, old-fashioned script. Her commonplace book, Diane explained, where she collected words and ideas that spoke to her. I thought it might inspire your writing. The gift was unexpectedly personal, a piece of family history entrusted to me not as a daughter-in-law, fulfilling a role but as a fellow creator who might appreciate its value. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved. I'll treasure it. That evening, after returning home from the Carters, Noah found me at the dining table, poring over his great-grandmother's collection of quotes and musings. What's all this? He asked, setting down his keys. I explained Diane's gift, showing him the delicate cards with their carefully penned insights. It's fascinating, like having a conversation across generations with someone I never met. Noah examined one of the cards, which contained a quote about courage being the discovery of new terrain within oneself. I had no idea this existed. Mom never mentioned it. I think she's rediscovering parts of her own history, I suggested. Finding meaning in different aspects of her family legacy than she focused on before? He nodded thoughtfully. Dad said something similar today. That mom seems to be reconnecting with family stories and values she set aside during her years building the business. He sat beside me, gently shuffling through the cards. It's like she's curating a different kind of legacy now. The observation rang true. In helping Diane sort through her office, I'd noticed her lingering over family photographs, personal correspondence, and mementos. Items that reflected connection and relationship rather than achievement and status. The Carters' moving day arrived in mid-August, coinciding with a record-breaking heat wave. Noah and I arrived early to help with final preparations, bringing cold drinks and extra fans to combat the sweltering temperature. The moving company handled the furniture and larger items, but there were countless small, valuable, or fragile possessions that Diane preferred to transport personally. As we worked together in the stifling heat, I noticed Diane becoming increasingly agitated. Her usual composure began to fray. Instructions became more abrupt, her movements more rigid, her responses to questions more clipped. When a mover asked about the placement of a particular side table, she snapped at him with a harshness reminiscent of her pre-wedding behavior. William caught my eye from across the room, his expression concerned. I nodded slightly, understanding his unspoken message. This was what Margaret had warned about, the stress of major change triggering a reversion to old patterns of control. Diane, I said gently, approaching her with a cold bottle of water. Why don't we take a short break? It's getting really warm in here. Her initial reaction was dismissive. There's no time for breaks. The movers are on a schedule and everything needs to be coordinated precisely. The movers are professionals, I reminded her. They know what they're doing, and pushing through in this heat isn't good for anyone. For a moment, I thought she might refuse or snap at me as she had at the mover. Instead, something shifted. In her expression, a flash of recognition, perhaps, of her own slipping control. She accepted the water bottle with a small nod. Perhaps you're right. 10 minutes. We stepped outside to the relative coolness of the covered patio. Diane sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I'm not managing this well, she admitted after taking a long drink. The heat, the chaos, the finality of it all. I can feel myself becoming that person again. The one who thinks she can perfect away anxiety by controlling every detail. The self-awareness in her observation was remarkable, a sign of genuine progress, despite the momentary regression. Moving is one of life's most stressful experiences, I offered. It's natural to fall back on old coping mechanisms under pressure. She smiled wryly. Dr. Martins would approve of that perspective. She's been preparing me for exactly this scenario. High stress. Situations triggering old patterns. Diane looked toward the house where William was visible through the window, calmly directing one of the movers. The difference now is that I can recognize when it's happening. I can make a different choice. And she did. After our brief break, Diane returned to the moving process with visibly renewed composure. She still organized and directed. Those skills were valuable in a complex logistical operation like moving, but with less rigidity, less insistence on perfection, more willingness to adapt when circumstances required flexibility. By late afternoon, the move was complete. The Carter family home of 4 decades stood empty, echoing with memories but ready for its new owners. We followed Diane and William to their new apartment at Eco-Urban Towers. helping them settle in essentials for their first night in the dramatically different space. The contrast between the two homes could hardly have been more striking. Where the colonial house had been formal, traditional, and expansive, their new apartment was modern, efficient, and compact. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city and distant mountains. The building's shared rooftop garden provided green space without the maintenance burden of their former extensive grounds. "What do you think?" William asked us as we stood in their new living room, surrounded by boxes but already appreciating the thoughtful design of the space. "It's beautiful," I said truthfully. "So bright and open." "Different," Noah added, still processing the dramatic change. "But in a good way, I think. It suits you, or at least who you're becoming." Diane smiled at that. "That's exactly right. It's not who we were, but perhaps who we're growing into." She moved to the windows, gazing out at the city spread below. Them. "There's something liberating about letting go of so much stuff. All those things we accumulated because we thought they defined us in some way. Though we did keep what matters most," William added, slipping an arm around her waist. "The photographs, the books we truly love, the pieces with real meaning." We ordered takeout for dinner, eating at their new, much smaller dining table, a handcrafted piece Noah had helped his father select from a local artisan. As we ate, conversation turned naturally to the future, to the Foundation's upcoming fall grant cycle, to my next book project, to Noah's expanding role in regional conservation efforts. "We've been thinking," William said during a pause in the conversation, "about traveling more. Now that we're not tied to such a large property and with Amanda fully taking over the business." "That sounds wonderful," Noah encouraged. "Where are you considering?" "Margaret has invited us to visit her in Thailand," Diane said, a hint of excitement in her voice that I'd rarely heard before. "And there are several international sustainable development projects that align with the Foundation's mission. We thought we might combine purpose with pleasure." The idea of Diane willingly stepping away from her carefully controlled environment to explore unfamiliar cultures and circumstances would have seemed impossible a year ago. Now it felt like a natural evolution of her journey toward a less rigid, more open approach to life. "When would you go?" I asked. "Not until after the holidays," William assured us. "We want to be here for our first Christmas as a family since, well, in quite some time." The mention of family holidays brought a comfortable warmth to the conversation. Last Christmas had been awkward, too soon after the wedding confrontation, for genuine ease, but with enough progress to make it civil if not particularly joyful. This year promised something different, a celebration built on the more authentic relationships we'd been nurturing throughout the months since our wedding. As Noah and I finally prepared to leave, Diane walked us to the door of their new apartment. "Thank you both, not just for today, but for everything." The vague everything encompassed so much, for standing our ground at the wedding, for giving her opportunities to make amends, for participating in the Foundation, for helping with the move, for being part of the transformation of her life in ways none of us could have anticipated when I refused to read those rewritten vows. "We're family," Noah said simply, embracing his mother. "This is what family does." As we drove home through the warm summer evening, I thought about that word, family, and how its meaning had evolved for us over the past year. We had moved from a concept of family defined by obligation, appearances, and prescribed roles to something more organic, more authentic, more capable of accommodating growth and change. "Penny for your thoughts?" Noah asked, noticing my contemplative silence. "I was just thinking about how far we've all come since the wedding," I said. "Your mom, especially." He nodded, turning onto our street. "It's like watching someone slowly, painfully unfold after being crammed into too small a container for decades." The metaphor was apt. Diane was indeed unfolding, rediscovering aspects of herself that had been compressed by anxiety, perfectionism, and rigid social expectations. The process wasn't always graceful or linear, as we'd seen during the stress of moving day, but it was genuine and profound. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd just read her vows that day?" I asked as we pulled into our driveway. "If I'd gone along with it to avoid the confrontation?" Noah cut the engine and turned to face me fully in the darkened car. I think about it sometimes. How easy it would have been to just go with the flow, read what was put in front of us to keep the peace. He reached for my hand. And how much we would have lost if you had. Not just our integrity in that moment, I reflected, but the catalyst for all this change. Exactly. By refusing to speak words that weren't yours, you created space for all of us to find our authentic voices. He smiled, the porch light casting soft shadows across his face, including my mother, though I doubt either of us could have predicted that outcome. As we entered our home, the small bungalow that reflected our values and priorities so differently from the formal Carter residence, I found myself reflecting on the power of that moment at the altar. Not because it had been dramatic or confrontational, but because it had been true. In choosing honesty over harmony, authenticity over appearance, we had inadvertently created the conditions for genuine connection to grow, where only controlled performance had existed before. The silver pen Diane had given me sat on my desk beside my current project, illustrations for a children's book about finding courage to speak one's truth. Beside it lay her grandmother's commonplace book, open to a quote I'd been contemplating. That morning, "The beginning of love is the will to let those we love be perfectly themselves, and not to twist them to fit our own image. Otherwise, we love only the reflection of ourselves we find in them." How fitting that this wisdom had been preserved in Diane's family all along, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered and embraced. Perhaps that was the most important lesson from our journey since the wedding. That transformation doesn't always require finding something new, but sometimes simply remembering something true that has been there all along, beneath the layers of protection and performance we build around our vulnerable hearts. An email from Diane arrived the next morning with a subject line that made me smile. Voice lessons. "Dear Elena, I wanted to thank you again for your help yesterday, particularly for your gentle redirection when I began to slip back into old controlling patterns during the stress of the move. Your intervention was exactly what I needed. Firm, but kind, without judgment or criticism. Our conversation on the patio has stayed with me. The idea of finding one's voice as more than just perfecting one's presentation, but as discovering one's authentic self, it resonates deeply with what I'm trying to do at this stage of my life. William and I are settling into our new home, and there's something surprisingly freeing about the smaller space, the necessity of being thoughtful about what we keep around us. I find myself wondering what other areas of my life might benefit from similar conscious curation. Dr. Martin suggested that I practice expressing appreciation directly when people have impacted me positively, rather than filtering such feelings through social obligations or formalities. So, in that spirit, I am deeply grateful for your presence in our family, not just as Noah's wife, but as the remarkable woman you are in your own right. The journey since your wedding has been challenging but transformative for me. Thank you for your part in that transformation, both the difficult moment that catalyzed it and the compassionate way you've allowed me to find a new path forward. With love and appreciation, Diane P.S. I've been thinking about your children's book concepts. If you're open to it, I'd love to hear more about your creative process sometime. Not to guide or direct, I've learned my lesson there, but simply to understand better the work that brings you such evident fulfillment. I shared the email with Noah over breakfast, watching his expression shift from surprise to thoughtful appreciation as he read his mother's words. "Wow," he said finally. I don't think my mother has ever written anything this personal or vulnerable in her life. Voice lessons, I repeated the subject line with a smile. I think we're all still learning. He reached across the table for my hand. Together. As the summer heat gave way to the first hints of autumn, I found myself reflecting on the cyclical nature of our story, how we had come full circle from one autumn to the next, from a wedding that began with conflict to a family that was learning, however imperfectly, to communicate with honesty and respect. Not the perfect, controlled family Diane had once tried to orchestrate, but something more real, more resilient, more capable of growth and adaptation. The lessons of that day at the altar continued to unfold in unexpected ways. By refusing to speak words that weren't mine, I had created space for authenticity that extended far beyond that moment. The ripples from that single act of integrity had transformed not just our wedding day, but our family's entire way of relating to one another. There would be challenges ahead, certainly. Margaret's warning about the fragility of Diane's progress had proven accurate during the stress of moving day. Old patterns don't disappear overnight, especially those reinforced over decades. But now we had new tools, new understanding, new commitment to navigating those challenges together, speaking our truths with both courage and compassion. As I turned back to my desk, to the children's book illustrations waiting for my attention, I picked up the silver pen Diane had given me, her grandmother's cherished possession now entrusted to me. The weight of it felt right in my hand, solid and real, like the connections we were building. One word at a time, one truth at a time, one day at a time. In the end, this was perhaps the true meaning of those wedding vows I had insisted on speaking. Not just promises between Noah and me, but an invitation to our entire family to emerge from behind carefully constructed facades and relate to one another with genuine presence, to stop reading from scripts written by fear and expectation and start speaking from hearts capable of growth, forgiveness, and love. Fall arrived in Portland with a spectacular display of color, painting the city in rich golds, deep reds, and fiery oranges. Noah and I marked our first wedding anniversary with a quiet weekend getaway to the coast, renting a small cabin where we could hear the ocean through open windows and watch the sunset paint the horizon in hues that reminded me of our wedding. Flowers. A year ago today, I was frantically checking my vows for the 100th time, Noah recalled as we walked along the shoreline, collecting interesting shells and sea glass, completely unaware of what my mother had done. I squeezed his hand, and I was having a moment of panic about walking down the aisle in front of 200 people. Little did we know the real drama waiting for us, he said with a wry smile that held no bitterness. In the months since our wedding day confrontation, we had found our way to a place where we could reference the incident without reopening old wounds, acknowledging it as a difficult but transformative moment in our family's journey. Would you change anything? I asked, genuinely curious. If you could go back to that day, knowing what would happen? Noah considered this as we walked, the rhythm of the waves providing a soothing backdrop to our reflections. Honestly? No. As challenging as it was in the moment, I think it needed to happen exactly as it did. He stooped to pick up a perfectly intact sand dollar. My mother needed that wake-up call. We needed to establish boundaries from the very beginning, and I needed to see you stand your ground so powerfully. The confidence in his answer warmed me. I feel the same way, though I might have appreciated a less public venue for such a pivotal confrontation. He laughed, tucking the sand dollar carefully into his pocket. Fair enough. But then again, the public nature of it might be what made it impossible for Mom to simply dismiss or rewrite what happened. Too many witnesses. Our anniversary weekend served as a brief, peaceful interlude before we returned to Portland and the busy season ahead. The foundation was preparing for its fall grant cycle. Noah's environmental work had expanded to include a major watershed restoration project, and I was deep in negotiations for a new children's book series focused on young people finding their authentic voices. Diane and William had settled into their new apartment at Eco-Urban Towers, adapting to downsized living with surprising enthusiasm. The rooftop community garden had become Diane's particular passion. She volunteered 3 mornings a week, teaching other residents about sustainable urban gardening techniques. The controlling socialite who had once employed 3 gardeners rather than touching soil herself now proudly arrived at family dinners with dirt under her manicured nails and homegrown produce in hand. "You've created a monster," William joked during one such dinner at their apartment, as Diane expounded on the virtues of different composting methods. "I can't get her out of that garden." "It's therapeutic," Diane insisted, serving a salad, made entirely from her rooftop harvest. "Dr. Martin says physical engagement with growing things is excellent for anxiety management. Plus," Noah added with a teasing smile, "plants don't talk back when you try to control them." A year ago, such a comment might have triggered Diane's defensiveness. Now she simply raised an eyebrow at her son. "Actually, they do. They die if you don't give them what they need, which isn't always what you think they should have." She passed the salad bowl to me with a meaningful look. "Rather like relationships." These small moments of self-awareness and humor had become more frequent in our interactions with Diane. The growth wasn't always linear. There were still occasions when stress or uncertainty triggered her controlling tendencies, but the overall trajectory was unmistakable. Most importantly, when she did slip into old patterns, she now recognized it more quickly and could usually course-correct before significant damage was done. As October progressed, bringing the anniversary of our wedding vow confrontation, I noticed Diane becoming quieter during our family gatherings, more reflective. During a foundation meeting in mid-October, she asked if Noah and I might be available for dinner the following week, on the exact date of our wedding. "Nothing formal," she assured us. "Just the 4 of us. There's something I'd like to share with you both." Noah and I exchanged curious glances, but readily agreed. Though we'd planned a quiet evening at home to acknowledge the anniversary of that difficult day, including his parents in the commemoration felt right. A recognition of how far we'd all come since that moment at the altar. When we arrived at their apartment on the evening in question, we found the space transformed. The dining table had been set with candles and autumn flowers that echoed our wedding colors. Soft music played in the background, and delicious aromas drifted from the kitchen where William was putting finishing touches on what smelled like his signature paella. "This is lovely," I said, accepting the glass of wine Diane offered. "But you didn't need to go to so much trouble." "It's not trouble," she assured me. "It's acknowledgement of an important anniversary." Her directness surprised me. I had expected the evening to dance around the significance of the date, perhaps referencing it obliquely but not addressing it head-on. "Mom, it's okay," Noah began, cautiously. "We don't need to—" "But I do," Diane interrupted gently. "I've been thinking about this day for weeks, working up to what I want to say." She motioned us toward the living room seating area. "Before dinner, if you don't mind." We settled onto the comfortable modern sofa that had replaced their formal antique furniture, while Diane took a seat in the armchair opposite, visibly gathering her thoughts. William joined us, standing supportively behind his wife's chair, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "A year ago today," Diane began, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion, "I committed what I now recognize as a serious violation of trust. I rewrote your wedding vows without your knowledge or consent, attempting to impose my vision of marriage onto your most sacred promises to each other." The direct acknowledgement hung in the air between us. Though Diane had apologized in various ways over the past year, she had never described her actions in such explicit terms. "At the time," she continued, "I told myself I was helping, improving upon what you had written, ensuring the ceremony reflected proper values and traditions. I convinced myself I knew better what you should promise each other. She shook her head slightly. The arrogance of that belief still shocks me when I reflect on it now. Noah reached for my hand, our fingers intertwining automatically. Dr. Martins has helped me understand the deeper roots of my behavior, the anxiety that drove me to control situations and people, the fear of allowing others their autonomy, the belief that perfect appearances could somehow guarantee perfect outcomes. Diane's gaze was direct, unflinching. But understanding the causes doesn't excuse the action. What I did was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong, and I am profoundly sorry for it. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the carefully crafted public apology she had offered at the foundation event, designed to repair her social image. This was something more personal, more vulnerable, a genuine reckoning with the harm she had caused. When you refused to read my version of the vows, Elena, she continued, turning to me specifically, you did more than stand up for yourself in that moment. You gave me an opportunity I didn't deserve but desperately needed. The chance to see myself clearly, perhaps for the first time in decades. Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. I had long since moved past anger at Diane's wedding day manipulation, but I hadn't anticipated being moved by her reflection on it. The past year has been... She paused, searching for the right word, transformative. Painful at times, certainly, but necessary. I've had to confront patterns and beliefs I'd never questioned. I've had to learn new ways of relating to both of you, to William, to my sister, even to myself. A small smile touched her lips. It turns out you can teach an old dog new tricks, though this particular old dog is still very much a work in progress. The self-deprecating humor, so unlike the Diane we had first known, broke the tension slightly. Noah chuckled, releasing some of the emotion that had built during her speech. You're doing the work, Mom, he said warmly. That's what matters. Diane nodded, acknowledging his support. I wanted to mark this anniversary not just with an apology, but with something more tangible. She reached for a small package on the side table, beautifully wrapped, of course, some habits remaining. Unchanged. This is for both of you. Noah accepted the package, looking to me before carefully unwrapping it. Inside was a handcrafted wooden frame, similar in style to the box that held her grandmother's pen, but larger. Behind the glass were two handwritten documents, side by side. Our actual wedding vows, I realized, recognizing my own handwriting on one side and Noah's on the other. Yes, Diane confirmed. William helped me locate the originals. I had them professionally preserved and framed. Her voice softened. The vows you wrote yourselves, the promises you chose to make to each other, they're beautiful, authentic, far more meaningful than anything I tried to substitute. The gesture was powerful in its symbolism, Diane not only acknowledging our right to speak our own promises, but actively preserving and honoring the words she had once tried to replace. There's an inscription on the back, William mentioned quietly. Noah turned the frame over carefully. A small brass plaque had been affixed to the wood, engraved with words that caught in my throat as I read them aloud. The truest vows are those that come from the heart, spoken by voices brave enough to claim them. With love and admiration for your courage to begin your marriage in authenticity. Diane and William. For a moment, no one spoke. The simple inscription represented such a profound shift in Diane's perspective, from seeing our personal vows as inadequate and requiring her intervention to recognizing them as more authentic and courageous than the traditional promises she had tried to impose. Thank you, I managed finally, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and all it represented. Noah set the frame carefully on the coffee table and moved to embrace his mother. It means a lot, Mom. Really. Diane returned his hug with visible emotion. "I'm still learning," she said as they separated. "Still making mistakes, but I'm trying to listen more than I direct, to support more than I control." "We've noticed," I assured her, taking my turn to embrace her. "The change has been remarkable." William cleared his throat, eyes suspiciously bright. "And if we've all finished being emotional for the moment, dinner is ready. The paella won't wait forever." The meal that followed felt like a true celebration, not just of our wedding anniversary, but of the journey we had taken together as a family since that challenging day. Conversation flowed easily, touching on the Foundation's work, Noah's conservation projects, my upcoming book, Diane and William's planned trip to Thailand with Margaret after the holidays. As we enjoyed William's delicious paella and a local Oregon Pinot Noir, I found myself studying Diane with new appreciation. The rigid, controlling woman who had tried to dictate our wedding vows was still visible in glimpses. In her perfect posture, her precisely applied makeup, her instinctive rearrangement of slightly crooked silverware. But these remnants of her former self now coexisted with something new, a capacity for self-reflection, an ability to laugh at her own foibles, a willingness to acknowledge others' feelings and perspectives. "I've been thinking," Diane said, as William served the dessert he had prepared, a rustic apple tart with vanilla bean ice cream, "about our holiday plans." Noah tensed slightly beside me, old reflexes dying hard. Historically, holiday planning had been a particular trigger for Diane's controlling tendencies, with detailed schedules, dress codes, and rigid expectations that left little room for spontaneity or outside input. "What about them?" he asked carefully. "I thought we might try something different this year," she continued, either not noticing or choosing to ignore his wariness. "Less formal, more collaborative. Perhaps each of us could be responsible for a different aspect of the celebration." William looked as surprised as we were by this suggestion. "What did you have in mind, dear?" "Well, Noah has always been fond of board games and puzzles. He could organize some family activities." She turned to me. "Elena, your artistic talents could be put to use with decorations or creative elements. William obviously handles the cooking, and I could." She paused, a hint of her old perfectionism surfacing. "Well, I suppose I could manage the music and overall ambiance." The suggestion was so unexpected, and so unlike Diane's usual approach to holiday planning, that it took us a moment to respond. "I think that sounds wonderful," I said finally, genuinely pleased by the collaborative vision she was proposing. "Though I hope you know what you're getting into, giving me creative control over decorations. I'm thinking handmade paper snowflakes and popcorn garlands." Diane's slight wince was followed by a determined smile. "If that's what brings you joy, then that's what we'll have." She took a deliberate breath. "I'm practicing flexibility." Noah laughed, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Well, in that case, I should warn you that my idea of family activities might include charades." "The horror," William deadpanned, sharing an amused glance with his wife. Diane Carter, playing charades. The society pages would have a field day. "Let them," Diane said with surprising lightness. "Perhaps it's time Portland society saw a different side of me." As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Noah paused to examine family photographs Diane had arranged on a side table. I carefully curated selection that had made the cut during their downsizing. Among them was a new addition, a candid shot from the Foundation announcement event, capturing a moment when the four of us were laughing together, completely unself-conscious. "I like this one," he said, picking it up for a closer look. "I don't remember seeing it before." "One of the event photographers captured it," Diane explained, joining him at the table. "I almost didn't include it at first. My hair was slightly disheveled, and I'm caught mid-laugh rather than properly posed." She smiled ruefully. But then I realized it's one of the few photographs where we all look genuinely happy together. Not positioned for appearance's sake, but simply present. With each other. The observation was insightful and revealing of how far she had come, choosing authenticity over perfection, valuing genuine connection over carefully constructed image. It's a good reminder, she added softly, of what matters. As we drove home that night, the framed wedding vows carefully secured on the back seat, Noah was unusually quiet, processing the evening's emotional weight. "What are you thinking?" I asked as we turned onto our street, the familiar silhouette of our little bungalow visible ahead. "I'm thinking about cycles," he said thoughtfully. "About how families tend to repeat patterns generation after generation, unless someone consciously breaks the chain." I considered this as we parked in our driveway. "Your mother breaking patterns that probably go back further than she even realizes." "Exactly." He turned to face me in the darkened car. "When she gave that toast tonight, about our vows being more authentic and meaningful than anything she could have written for us. Do you know what I kept thinking about?" "What?" "Our future children. How they'll never know the version of my mother that I grew up with, the rigid, controlling Diane who couldn't tolerate deviation from her perfect plans. They'll know this newer version instead. Still imperfect, still working on herself, but so much more authentic and connected." The thought caught at my heart. We had been discussing starting a family sometime in the next year, tentative conversations about timing and preparations. The idea that our children would have a relationship with Diane unencumbered by the history that had shaped Noah's experience with her. It was a powerful example of how healing could extend across generations. "That's a beautiful thought," I said, reaching for his hand in the darkness. "Breaking cycles, creating something new." Inside our home, we found the perfect spot for our framed wedding vows. On the wall of our small study where we both spent time working, a daily reminder of the promises we had made and the courage it sometimes takes to speak one's truth. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about the journey we had all taken since that moment at the altar, when I discovered Diane's manipulation of our vows. What had begun as a painful confrontation had evolved into something I could never have anticipated, a catalyst for genuine transformation, not just in Diane but in all of our relationships with one another. The silver pen she had given me months ago sat on my nightstand beside the journal, where I sometimes recorded ideas for my children's books. I picked it up, feeling its comfortable weight in my hand, appreciating anew the symbolism of Diane entrusting me with this piece of her family history. Noah emerged from the bathroom, finding me lost in thought. "Still processing tonight?" I nodded. "It's remarkable, isn't it? A year ago today, we were standing at that altar, facing one of the most difficult moments of our relationship. And now here we are, celebrating not just our marriage, but the changes that confrontation set in motion." He sat beside me on the bed, his expression thoughtful. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if you'd just gone along with it. Read those vows she wrote, avoided the conflict. We'd have started our marriage with a fundamental dishonesty," I said softly, "speaking promises that weren't truly ours. And my mother would never have had reason to examine her controlling behavior," Noah added. "She'd have been reinforced in her belief that she had the right, even the obligation, to manage everyone's lives according to her vision." I set the pen back on the nightstand. It's strange to think that standing up for ourselves in that moment wasn't just about protecting our wedding vows. It was about creating the possibility for something better, for all of us. Noah pulled me close, his arms warm and secure around me. "You know, when people talk about wedding days, they usually focus on the perfect dress, the beautiful venue, the romantic first dance. No one ever says, 'The best part of our wedding was when my bride refused to read the vows my mother secretly rewrote,' causing a scene that ultimately transformed our entire family dynamic. I laughed against his shoulder. Not exactly a Pinterest-worthy wedding moment. But maybe it should be, he said more seriously. Because that moment of truth, uncomfortable as it was, created the foundation for our marriage that nothing else could have. It established from the very beginning that we would speak our own truths, make our own choices, forge our own path. As we settled into bed, I reflected on how that single moment of courage at the altar had rippled outward in ways I could never have anticipated, transforming not just our wedding day, but our family's entire way of relating to one another. Diane's journey toward greater authenticity and less rigid control. William's quiet evolution from enabler to supportive partner in her growth. Noah's healing relationship with his parents. My own unexpected connection with a mother-in-law who had once seemed determined to reshape me into someone more suitable for her son. The confrontation at the altar had not been the end of a story, but the beginning of one. A story still unfolding, still revealing new dimensions as we continued to grow individually and together. Not the perfect, controlled narrative Diane might once have tried to write for us, but something more authentic, more resilient, more capable of incorporating both harmony and discord into its evolving composition. In the morning light, I woke to find Noah already up, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Pulling on my robe, I found him at the dining table, papers spread before him, his expression focused. "What's all this?" I asked, accepting. The mug he had prepared for me. "Ideas for holiday activities," he explained with a smile. "If my mother is brave enough to let go of controlling Christmas, the least I can do is take my role seriously." As I looked over his shoulder at the notes he'd made, board games, group puzzles, even a scavenger hunt, I felt a wave of appreciation for how earnestly he was embracing his mother's gesture toward collaborative celebration. "She's really trying," I observed, sliding into the chair beside him. "She is," he agreed, making another note on his list. "And so am I. So are we all." It struck me then, watching my husband plan Christmas games with the same focused attention he brought to his environmental restoration projects, that this was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of our wedding vow confrontation. Not just the changes in Diane, significant as they were, but the opportunities those changes created for all of us to relate to one another in new, more authentic ways. When I had refused to read vows that weren't mine at the altar, I had been thinking only of protecting the integrity of that moment, of beginning our marriage with honesty rather than compliance. I couldn't have known that simple act of standing firm would create the space for Diane to examine patterns of control that had defined her life for decades. That William would find the courage to stop enabling behaviors he had tacitly accepted for years. That Noah would begin healing from the subtle wounds left by a childhood spent navigating his mother's rigid expectations. I certainly couldn't have imagined that a year later, we would commemorate that painful confrontation not with lingering resentment, but with genuine appreciation for the growth it had catalyzed. That Diane would preserve and honor the very vows she had once tried to replace. That we would be planning a holiday celebration built on collaboration rather than control. The most meaningful transformations often begin with moments of truth, uncomfortable, sometimes painful reckonings that disrupt carefully maintained illusions, but create the possibility for something more authentic to emerge. Speaking my own vows at our wedding had been such a moment, not just for me, but for our entire family. As Noah and I finished our coffee, discussing holiday plans and foundation work in the day ahead, I found myself profoundly grateful for the courage we had both shown that day at the altar. Not just the courage to face Diane's manipulation in the moment, but the deeper courage to believe that honesty, even when difficult, serves relationships better than comfortable pretense ever could. That belief had been vindicated beyond anything we could have imagined, transforming a moment of wedding day crisis into the foundation for a family dynamic built on authenticity rather than appearance, on mutual respect rather than control. on truth, spoken with both conviction and compassion. What I had said at the altar that day, refusing the script Diane had written and speaking instead from my heart, had indeed been a vow, though not the one my mother-in-law had tried to impose. It had been a promise to our marriage that we would begin as we meant to go on. With honesty, with integrity, with the courage to speak our truths even when doing so disrupted carefully laid plans or challenged others' expectations. A year later, that promise remained at the heart of our relationship, with each other, with our families, with the world we were creating together. Not perfect, not scripted, not always smooth or easy, but authentic. Gloriously, messily, powerfully authentic. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.